Release That Witch Eye by Ermu. Chapter 141 Kisses. Later that evening, Roland sat in his office and began to think about new equipment. The fact that the church's pills had also appeared in the port of Clearwater brought him a strong sense of crisis. He could even feel his scalp tingling all the time, regardless if it was the fact that the church was supporting both him and Garcia in their fight for the throne, or the thought of Garcia's thousands of additional men she got from her alliance. Thinking of the thousands of soldiers who are wrapped in iron armor and able to run at speeds equal to a full-on cavalry charge, it was hard not to become overwhelmed by such an image. Stopping such a massive charge with his thin rows of gunners would be a tough task for him. As soon as one person was able to reach his ranks, his first army would come to receive heavy losses. Fortunately, this pill didn't make someone immune to injuries. Even with the medication, the consumer's body was still made of flesh and blood. He had to create weapons that had a higher firing rate and precision, which would also be able to fire over a longer distance. But without mercury fulminate as the primer, Roland had to find another way to bypass this hurdle, and until then he had to produce some alternative equipment to deal with any possible crises. And with Anna's new ability, he had the confidence in achieving this. Now, as long as he could draw the design, Anna would be able to process the object he wanted to create accurately. But also, her efficiency has reached an extraordinary level compared with all the prior tasks where the blacksmith had to create each part of the flintlock carefully. She could now stack several pieces together and form and cut them all at the same time. With a universal education system and a unified measuring system, he had prepared all the steps he needed for starting a large-scale industrialized production work. But that doesn't mean that he can take a shortcut each time he comes across one. Anna's new capacity was simply a treasure house, carrying an endless potential with it that he could tap into. Every afternoon Roland was now at the testing area at the North Slope Mountain, studying and exploring together with Anna on the usage of her new ability. And in case he didn't have any time to spare, he would let her practice her control by carving some small items such as little witch dolls. However, at the moment, it seemed that her carving skill was still at the stage of immaturity. But Roland believed firmly that one day his whole bookcase would be filled with colorful witch dolls, probably, right? He picked up a steel ruler and placed it on the parchment, using it to draw 2 straight lines. At this moment he heard someone knocking at his door. As long as a guard didn't shoot some information, then 9 out of 10 times it was a witch at his door. At this moment, most of the witches were in the living room on the first floor, undergoing scrolls writing and reading lessons. So, the person at the door could only be someone who didn't have to participate in primary teaching, and there was only one witch who didn't need them. Come in. Sure enough, when the door was opened, Anna came stepping into the room. She gently closed the door and then went to Roland's side at the table, holding the phantom image of a book in her arms. Since the beginning of the lessons he could daily see her with a copy of his book. He had to say, even though Anna wasn't very talkative, her popularity within the group of witches was unexpectedly good. Thinking about the past, it was the same with Nana, who was attached to her like she was her tail. Perhaps she was born with a natural charm to attract other witches? How can I help you? Well, she nodded in greeting and then laid the book she was holding open in front of Roland. Here, you said that everything in the world was made up of tiny balls, which are all different from one another, but later on you also wrote that they could be turned into waves. What are waves? Anna asked. When you throw a stone into the water, the rising ripples are waves. The prince coughed twice. This is just a concept, but this good enough, you don't need to get to the bottom of it. Why? Because I don't know it myself, Roland cried out silently. Quantum mechanics is a mysterious and unexplored subject. And as long as I don't know something I won't write about it. Even if that might be the truth, I can't say it aloud. Because the balls have the characteristics of waves but they also possess the characteristics of matter. We are the same as those tiny balls, only that our mass is too big, making it difficult for us to observe the fluctuation as they happen. As for a deeper understanding, it will still take several generations of research. He thought for a moment and then added, because this phenomenon is opposite to our common sense, it is tough for us to understand. For us, it's hard to imagine a 4-dimensional space inside of the 3-dimensional world. So, you don't need to put it into your heart. Anna curled up her lips, clearly showing that she wasn't satisfied with Roland's explanation, but she quickly asked, "What is a four-dimensional space?" When she finally no longer asked any further questions, the princes had already become thirsty from all the talking. He had really underestimated Anna's thirst for knowledge. If it went on like this, it wouldn't be long before he didn't have anything left that he could teach her. Especially when Roland had asked her about her progress in math, she just replied, "Until now it was quite simple, and now that I've come to the topic of equations and matrices, they seem to be fascinating." Simple and fascinating. Roland suddenly felt that the gap between person to person was too great. How long has it been? 1 week from learning simple elementary math until she came to equations and matrices, and next it would be differentiation and integration. Back at his school, Anna would definitely have been an intimidating top student. Moreover, a beautiful bookworm. Roland looked at the woman who was reading the book, getting spellbound by what he saw. She had carefully arranged her hair over her forehead, but other hair strands had fallen over her cheek. Seeing this, Roland could not stop himself from stretching out his index finger, gently stroking the hair behind her ear. Feeling his finger, Anna turned her head, looking at Roland, with a smile all over her face. Her lake-like pupils had no longer their peaceful expression. Instead, they were full of ripples. Staying so close to each other, until Anna opened her mouth trying to say something, but she was only able to move her lips, no sound could be heard. But Roland was still able to read her lips. "Right now Nightingale isn't here." The meaning of the sentence was very clear, and Roland thought that it was stupid to pretend that he didn't understand her. The whole room was silent, letting him faintly hear her breathing and the speeding up of her heartbeat. Roland could no longer stop himself, he became drawn towards her lips. Anna instead closed her eyes, and her cheeks gained a rosy touch. Being so near to her, Roland could smell the fragrance of her body, and then finally their lips gently kissed. Getting lost in the soft touch, the time seemed to stand still, making it impossible for him to tell how long it was until they separated. Not giving him a chance to say anything, Anna stood on her tiptoe, joining their lips once more. Asterisk. Hey, hey. Mystery Moon sat cross-legged on her bed, deep in meditation with her eyes closed, her hands held high, forming a circle with her thumb and index finger. "Have you turned mad?" Lily, who was wrapping a towel around her wet hairs, asked as she frowned. "I'm thinking of myself as a particle," she said, opening her eyes. "I'm a particle," and she then pointed at Lily. "You're a particle." The latter gave her a supercilious look and got into the soft bed. "Oh, no again," Mystery Moon sighed, "I truly think of everything as a particle, so why can't I evolve like Anna?" "But you don't believe it," Lily explained. "I do believe it." "You do not believe," she shook her head, "you can deceive others, but you can't fool yourself, even so it isn't an excellent reason, but I think that regardless of what the prince says, Anna believes everything he says, without questioning it. Of course, there is also the point that she is much smarter than you. This is the main reason why she was able to evolve her magic and gain access to new abilities. In other words, don't think any further about it, instead give your mind some peace and quiet," Lily said, and patting the place beside herself. "Don't you want to get stronger powers?" Mystery Moon asked disbelievingly. "Furthermore, I also want to do something for the prince." "Ah. I should evolve my magic so that I can let my food preservation last longer?" She yawned. "No, thank you. Besides, why do you want to do more work for him? Men are fickle and ruthless people, you only have to take Echo as an example. Even so, you say you aren't interested, but with the exception of Leaves, you are the most attentive and serious one during class," Mystery Moon muttered. Lily took her pillow and threw it against Mystery Moon's face. "Let me sleep." Chapter 142 Mine Cart. Since the day he had conquered the Longsong stronghold, a half-month had already passed, and the 5 noble families of Longsong stronghold had by now all already delivered the needed people and supplies to Border Town. After the creation of the Ministry of Agriculture was completed, the new spring had finally begun, which was the first step for Roland's farming revolution. The serfs, who already saw the dawn to their life as free people, started to work filled with motivation. The scene where someone had to use the whip to encourage the serfs to work basically disappeared in the area south of the Shui River. The serfs who were lazy discovered that even though no one came to encourage their speed, the officers of the town hall still came to control their work with their strange measuring tools. It was clear that the Lord didn't care about the harvest of 1 or 2 fields. The only one who should care for their crops were the serfs who were working for their own future. Even so, the quality of the officers of the Ministry of Agriculture wasn't so outstanding. They had already thoroughly comprehended the distribution according to work principle, so Roland requested of them that they unceasing repeated these content to the serfs. To strengthen the indoctrination effect, as well as to satisfy the prince's own feeling, the shore at the Shui River was filled with red banners, which read, "Labor is the only way to get rich, work brings honor and glory, work can change your destiny," and so forth. Of course, these measures weren't possible without taking any objections. For example, Barav was the first to stand up and complain about it. "Your Royal Highness, something like this is meaningless. The vast majority of the serfs aren't even able to read. Even if they could, they don't care about the text written on the banners. These people are just uneducated and ignorant. For some even the whip doesn't work, so what can you expect of some unfathomable and mystery text?" Roland's answer, however, was quite simple: those banners are not meant for them. "So why do you want to set up these banners?" Hearing this answer, the assistant minister showed a very confused expression. To create a living example. He had never thought that serfs were stupid and unchangeable. It was true that they were uneducated, but that didn't mean that they couldn't think. Greed and interest will drive even a stupid person. That was simply human nature. So, if the implementation of the Ministry of Agriculture seemed to have little effect in the beginning, it would still leave a primer in their hearts. Just like a seed, it would eventually begin to grow. When the first of the serfs were promoted to freemen, and when they used the harvested crops as an exchange for money to buy beautiful clothing, fine food, and even robust and warm brick houses, the oftentimes repeated slogan would soon come back to their mind and become a reality which would burn itself deep into their hearts. As for the banner at the shore, it was for the time that the universal education system would bear its first fruits. By only relying on their own hands to get rid of poverty, becoming an official member of border town, even more than the native inhabitants, this was the power of hard work. By comparing it, they could all feel the gap between them, and their only chance to close it is by taking the intuitive to pursue him. Like this, the individual efficiency would rise to its highest level. Asterisk. Ironhead stood at the tunnel entrance of the mine, waiting for the delivery of a new ore. Since the months of demons after he was nearly cooked by the high temperature of the steam, he never dared to stand so near to the black machine ever again. Fortunately, there was the angelic-like Miss Nana in Border Town. Whenever Ironhead touched his healed cheeks, his heart was filled with warm emotions. During his deluded and panic-stricken moments, he had even suspected that Miss Nana was one of the devil's minions, but that was clearly a desecration of herself. So, after the winter, he deliberately raised 2 salted fish and a wild boar leg and delivered them to the Pine family. To his surprise, Titus Pine was a viscount, but unlike the other aristocrats who always held their nose high in the air, he openly accepted his apology. This was the first time that Ironhead felt that not all of the nobles were all ruthless people. "Old Iron," shouted a miner who was covered in dust while he came running out from the tunnel, "the rope has already been fastened." "All right," he exclaimed and turned in the direction of the steam engine. "Everyone clear the area. Frank, first you have to lift up the green lever, then you press the red lever. If you make a mistake, I'm going to twist off your head." "Rest assured, Old Iron, I know what I'm doing," Frank shouted back. After Nils was accepted into the First Army, it was now Ironhead who was in charge of the operation of the steam engine. During the first few days, Frank had often made mistakes with the order, which had even caused one of the pipes to burst, so every time he made a new mistake he would get beaten up. Fortunately, His Royal Highness did not care about this matter. Not only did he immediately send people to replace the damaged part, he didn't even make them pay for the destroyed part. Originally, Ironhead had already formed a plan to confiscate their monthly payment in case of something happening. With the opening of the intake valve, the steam engine released a majestic white cloud of gas and the main wheel began to slowly turn, moving the capstan and stretching the hemp rope straight. Don't let your spirits wander. Look at the hemp rope, look at it carefully. Old Iron shouted. Now, in addition to the steam engine, the transportation of the ore in the mine tunnel had also changed. His Royal Highness had ordered artisans to create many wooden sleepers, which then were laid along the whole of the mine's tunnel. Afterward 2 long wooden sticks were also placed on the wooden sleepers, which at first glance it looked like a wooden ladder. His Royal Highness had called it a wooden rail transportation system, which is a very convoluted name. Even so, it doesn't seem to be too complicated, but together with the wooden ladder, it also came with a special miner's cart. That cart is really something. Usually, we needed 3 to 4 days to transport the ore, but the steam engine can pull several carts out in just a moment's breath. Ironhead had precisely observed this 4-wheel miner's cart. It could run on the wooden tracks and was made from top to bottom completely out of iron. Using so much iron should have cost a lot of money. The key reason that it could move on those thin sticks of wood without falling laid in the way of its construction. The inside of the wheel was smaller than its edge, fixing it firmly on the rail. On top of the wheels there stood a boxy iron pot, which had on its end and beginning each a small hole where they could be tied together with a hemp rope. He couldn't help himself from admiring His Royal Highness' wisdom. With such a simple design, he had made the transporting of the ore so much easier. Before his invention, it was the transportation of the ore, which was the most time-consuming labor. However, this system also wasn't perfect. For example, just after 5 days of usage, there were already 2 wooden rails which had been crushed under the weight, and it didn't take much time until others followed after them. Later, His Royal Highness had wrapped all the rails in a thin layer of iron, somewhat improving the durability of the rails. In addition to the problems with the tracks, the mine also had a rope break by accident, which still haunted Ironhead until this day. According to the regulations, they should only drag 4 mine carts out at the same time. But on that day, the miners were unusually quick, and because of this, they had linked 6 mine carts together. During the first half of the transport everything went well, but then suddenly broke one of the hemp ropes. The rebound of the half-arm-thick rope was so powerful that the miner who got hit by the rope got several ribs broken. The mine carts instead slid down from the trail and knocked several of the miners off their feet, crushing their legs under it. Fortunately, Ironhead, who had encountered such an accident himself, instantly knew what to do. He immediately organized some miners who helped him to transport the injured men to the home of the Viscount. He was aware that as long as they still had some life left in them, Miss Nana would be able to heal them as if nothing had ever happened. "Old Iron, the mine carts are out," shouted a man who was responsible for overlooking the mine entrance. Hearing this, Ironhead shouted his next orders: "Frank, wait 10 breath and only then should you shut down the steamer. Pay attention to the order." "Understood." After the 4 mine carts had slowly stopped at the end of the track, Ironhead went over to record the results of their harvest. The first 2 carts were filled with a reddish-brown stone, iron ore, which was also the same kind of mineral which was found the most in the mine. The third cart was filled with grayish stones with hints of yellow, which should be copper. But when Ironhead came to the 4th cart, he got rooted on the spot immediately. In it was a kind of ore he had never seen before. They were of a dark brown, but when the sunlight fell on them, they sprinkled in a dark metallic luster. "These stones are clearly an unknown mineral." Ironhead shook his head. "The Northern Slope mine is so large and has so many branches, it's normal that we would find inexplicable things in it." So, he just drew a cross on his paper, giving the signal to send the carts further into the warehouse. As for the pile of black stone, whether it would be directed to the furnace or not, had nothing to do with him. Chapter 143 Migrants. The sailboat coming from Longsong Stronghold slowly docked at the pier of border town. After the gangway was lowered, the people on the ship began to walk down the gangway while carrying all kinds of bags. For most of them, it was the first time that they had set foot on this strange land, so they appeared to be somewhat at a loss by what they saw, but the sailors behind them urged them to move further and disregard their uneasy feelings. When the crowd began to push forward, a middle-aged woman's foot accidentally slipped. Her body became so unbalanced that she was already falling over the gangway. However, another woman quickly stepped ahead and caught the middle-aged woman's wrist, stopping her fall. Thank you." The rescued woman's chest was still rising and falling quickly, showing her lingering fear as she said thank you several times. The other woman, however, just cheerfully waved her hand, indicating that a thank you wasn't necessary. Standing on the pier and waiting for the arriving travelers was Ferlin Eltek. He immediately saw that the skillfully acting woman was Irene, his beloved wife. She wore a white dress, and her long hair was coiled up on top of her head. She always looked beautiful and refined. The knight was no longer able to suppress his excitement. The moment Irene finally set foot on the pier, he immediately began to quickly approach her, forcing the poor woman who was still clinging on to her away from her while totally disregarding the shouts of the people around him. Getting approached so unexpectedly, Irene became shocked, but the moment she recognized that it was Ferlin who had hugged her, she fell into his arms. "When I heard the news of the Duke's defeat, I got really scared. And when I later tried to meet you in Longsong Stronghold, I never got the chance." Irene immediately began to speak. "Fortunately, you are safe now. I was imprisoned in the dungeon of the Lord's castle, and it was impossible for the guards to let you in," Ferlin explained as he let go of his wife. "How was your time during the last half-month, was it okay?" For a moment she didn't give him an answer, but then she quietly said, "I left the theater." Ferlin immediately understood the meaning behind his wife's words. During the time when he was still the first knight in the Western Territories, only the Duke dared to lay his hands on her body. However, when he had become His Royal Highness prisoner, the men in Irene's theater group no longer had to hide their malicious intents. They were only waiting for the right opportunity to assault her. So if she had still gone to the theater to work, it would be the same as sending a sheep into a tiger's den. "That does not matter, I got a job here, and the salary also isn't low." Ferlin tried to comfort her. "Let us first go home. There, we can talk in peace." "Home?" Irene was clearly surprised. "We do not have to live separately?" Usually, the prisoners who weren't killed during the fight and who weren't bought free were mostly used as coolies. These prisoners were packed in bunches and had to live in tents or barracks, laying on the ground which was only covered with straw. At the same time, the families of such prisoners weren't treated any better. The women had to live in special camps, where they also had to sleep on the floor. During the time the men worked, the women had to clean up the men's homes and wash their laundry. Thinking of this, Ferlin got a warm feeling within his heart. At the farm near the Longsong Stronghold, Irene at least had her own spacious room with a comfortable and soft bed. Yet, she still chose to come to Border Town on her own. Even though she knew that she had to live with other women in a small house or tent and would have to do forced labor every day, she didn't flinch. "I am now a teacher." In one hand he took Irene's luggage and with the other he grabbed her hand. They walked side by side in the direction of the new civilization district. "As a teacher, I get my own house for free." To tell the truth, when he had first heard the teacher's treatment from the prince, he hadn't expected too much. As a prisoner, having his own room could be seen as good. Even if the room had leaks where the wind or the rain could come through, it would still be a good living area after repairing it himself. Thinking of this, the actual result was totally unexpected for him. He had never thought that the assigned houses for the teachers would be so regular. Entering the new district, the streets suddenly became spacious, and the ground became covered with gray gravel. The stones on the ground were smooth and flat, and even after walking on them for a long while, their feet wouldn't hurt. At first, Ferlin didn't understand the reason for all of this. This was clearly a waste of manpower and the mason's time. He didn't understand the reason for it until he saw rainwater flowing along the gaps in the stones sinking into the ground on a day with heavy rain. The rainwater was led into drainage ditches on both sides of the road. In Longsong Stronghold, every time when it rained, the streets became muddy and were covered with puddles, so the new streets in Border Town were many times better. Irene, who was taking in her surroundings, showed a puzzled expression and asked, "Here all the houses seem to be new, are you sure you went the right way?" "Yes, my dear, we're almost there." 2 corners later, Ferlin Eltek paused in front of a 2-story brick house with Irene. "We're here." "Where?" She turned around twice, only to see that her husband was still looking at the house directly in front of them. Not daring to ask aloud, she covered her mouth. Is the whole house our home? Of course not, Roland laughed. This is the teacher building, our home is in the middle of the second floor, now let us step inside. Taking the key out of his pocket to open the door, Roland pulled his wife by her hand into the new home. Their home contained a central hall, 2 bedrooms, and 2 auxiliary rooms, which were freely available for them. Although the rooms were small, it was still surprisingly comfortable. Whether it was the central hall decoration or the bedroom layout, everything felt quite refreshing. And now with Irene at Roland's side, the house was now even more perfect. Heaven, are you sure you were taken as a captive? Irene couldn't stop herself as she ran from one room to another, carefully looking at everything. She was as excited like a small child. Will we actually live here? Well, of course. Roland answered happily and took some bread and cheese from the cupboard and placed them on the table. You didn't eat anything on board, right? Let us first fill your stomach, I will have to go out to work later. Right, you are a teacher now. Irene ran back to her husband. Do you have to teach the children of the nobility? No, not the nobles, rather I have to instruct His Highness citizens. Citizens? Irene couldn't believe what she had heard. Teach them what? Deciding that an example would be better than his explanation, he took a book from the table and gave it to his wife. I have to teach them how to read and write. This was given to me by His Highness, my teaching material. Even so, he had chosen to become a teacher, but he was still worried that he would be unable to do the job. After all, normally it was always a white-haired old man who served as teacher. However, His Royal Highness's attendant had said that he should just teach according to the teaching materials. Looking at this so-called textbook, he realized that the concept of learning how to read and write could also be refined to such a degree. From the teaching method to the course's contents, everything was written down. On the first page, there was also a list of dozens of frequently asked questions by novice teachers, such as, how to become a good teacher, how to awaken the student's interest in learning, how to test the effectiveness of one's teaching. The answers were always short and easy to understand, giving the reader the feeling of having learned something new. Without realizing it himself, Roland had already been attracted to the book, even before the start of his career. Irene was also clearly such a case. From early on she had lived in the theater and had read many books and the scripts for plays. Roland had lamented more than once that with his wife's face and intelligence, if she had been born into an aristocratic family, her name would have certainly been known as an outstanding woman. After turning a few pages, Irene suddenly raised her head and asked, previously you said that the teachers are paid quite well? 20 silver royals a month, and an annual raise of 5. There is also no theater here, right? No, there. Roland hesitated, he had already guessed his wife's idea. Sure enough, the other side closed the book and laughingly said, then it's decided, I will also become a teacher, honey, just like you. Chapter 144 True Thoughts. Near the North Slope mine, at the furnace backyard. Nightingale picked up the glass which laid on the table and raised it near her eyes to take a closer look. The translucent crystal glass sparkled in the light and not even a little bit of discoloration could be seen. She knew that this cup was known as the crystal cup. The firing process and the formula had always been the royal alchemist's confidential information. The value of such cups like the one she held in her hands were measured in gold royals. Such crystal glassware was only used together with silver tableware. They served as an opportunity for powerful nobles or wealthy businessmen to show off their wealth. But now, these crystal containers were gathered from inside the whole palace and were about to be melted into their raw state. Your Highness, you can't burn these cups, they are worth several gold royals. Nightingale exclaimed. I have no time to study how to turn sand into a colorless glass, so this was the only way I could get it. Roland took another beautiful cup and threw it into the cauldron formed from Anna's black fire. Seeing this cup, Nightingale remembered that the prince had used it to drink ale out of it during their afternoon tea sessions before the start of the months of demons and during the welcoming party for her sisters. Due to the stable high temperature, the glass inside the pot soon began to melt, turning into a sticky paste. Do you get glass? by burning sand? Anna asked. Are they made out of the same substances? Well, the main ingredients are similar, but in the sand, there are a lot of impurities. The glass created by burning natural sand is partially brown or green most of the time, which doesn't meet the required standards. So with other words, crystal clear glass is created out of pure sand? Hearing this question, Roland had to smile. You can think of it like that. I already put this knowledge in the book, so you will see it again later. Those small balls decide what matter looks like. Whatever, I don't understand it anyway. Nightingale thought, uninterested. The color of the glass doesn't affect the function of its container. Furthermore, you aren't even using them as drinking glasses, so why do you insist on using clear crystal cups? Asking this herself, she went to Anna and took a look at the remolded glassware. Although they were still transparent and crystal clear, their new appearance and their former form of cups were completely different. Some looked like a tube, with a round bottom and a thin and long body. The other ones looked like bottles with the body of a kettle, but the bottleneck was only thumb-sized. The strangest thing was a tube that was bent like a horseshoe but with no seals on either side of it. Not understanding their function, Nightingale asked, "What are you going to do with these crystal glasswares?" "I won't use them. They are for the alchemist who will later come to Border Town." Roland used a rod to stir within the melted glass. "They can use these vessels to extract acids and alkali chemicals. I need those chemicals to produce new weapons." "Acids? Alkali chemicals?" Nightingale blinked confusedly with her eyes, completely unable to understand what he was talking about. This kind of feeling made her depressed. But if she asked one question after another, she would seem to be ignorant, and Nightingale really didn't want to expose this side of herself to Anna, so she tried to focus on their conversation. This was the only way she could understand what they were talking about. "How do you want to lure alchemists to Border Town? Even Longsong Stronghold has no alchemy workshop. You have to go to Redwater City to find some alchemist, and I also heard that their pay is even higher than that of ministers. It will be hard to recruit them with gold royals alone." "You actually know a lot," Roland replied with a smile. "That's right. I have already sent people on their way to Redwater City. I'm awaiting their answer in around 2 weeks. But I don't try to recruit them with the help of gold royals. Instead, I offered to reveal some secrets of alchemy to them. As for if I am able to recruit them or not, we will see, but at least I tried it." The praise in the first part of His Royal Highness' explanation immediately dispelled Nightingale's depressed mood, so she happily went to the center of the yard and picked up one of the pastries placed on a round table and stuffed it into her mouth. Since Roland would now spend most of his time staying at the experimental site during the afternoon, the tea session had also moved from the castle backyard to the northern mountain slope. On the round table there were the special snacks the chef had created under Roland's instructions. For example, this is called steamed stuffed bun. Its crust was made out of wheat flour, but she didn't know the kind of method they had used to make it so incomparably soft. It was wrapped around a meatball, and when she bit into it, her mouth was filled with juice. In that way, it wasn't like bacon, which was hard to swallow. As long as one bit into it, it was the perfect fusion of minced meat and meat stock. After happily eating it, Nightingale put one finger after another into her mouth and sucked them clean. While sitting on the couch with a full stomach and a worry-free heart, Nightingale was suddenly overcome with a tired feeling. Can it be that I have become more and more lazy as of late? Her body was sprinkled by the afternoon sun, surrounding her with warmth just like water. The rustling sound of leaves created by the spring breeze calmed her heart. She took off her shoes, rolled her legs under her body and laid down sideways. This perspective allowed her to directly look at the back door of the calcining room, which had an extra curtain in front of the door. The curtain was most probably only for her so that she couldn't secretly enter the room. Thinking of this, Nightingale felt it was quite funny. The wall separating it from the backyard was well and good, but in the end, it didn't matter. After all, she could just go through the ground. She had also once entered the mysterious room, even standing quietly beside him during the production process, but she still didn't take the finished gunpowder. However, the other side still thought that she didn't know anything about it, but in the end, he didn't know that it was he who was being kept in the dark. After moving her head, Nightingale was able to look at Anna. She was holding a recently melted down cup in her hands and spoke with a serious and focused expression to His Royal Highness. Towards this talented woman with a common family background, Nightingale's heart only had feelings of admiration. She and her sisters were able to escape from their fate of homelessness and were freed from the torture of the demonic bite largely because of Anna. If she hadn't changed the view of how the prince looked at the witches, all these positive developments would have never happened. If His Highness were to ever actually take a witch as his wife, then Anna was almost the only person Nightingale could think of. Although there was also a trace of expectation in her own heart, Nightingale had chosen to deeply bury it in her heart. She decided that it would be enough for her to be happy as long as she was able to stay with His Highness for most of the time. But when she closed her eyes, she couldn't prevent the pictures from appearing in her head. Roland stood in the king's palace in front of the throne as the new king. He was wearing a golden crown and was holding a scepter in his hand. Then he began to move toward the castle terrace, where he showed himself to the crowd, accepting their admiration and cheers. The whole time was a woman walking and standing at his side. She was wearing a white satin skirt and had to be Anna. Just like the king, she also wore a golden crown, but her face was hidden behind a veil. She raised her hand and waved to the people with a smile. During the entire time, lightning was drawing circles above them, letting rose petals rain down on them, and from the king's clock tower in the distance, a melodious bell toll could be heard. On both sides, Nightingale could see her sisters standing, shouting their blessings and applauding. She could feel how her body was slowly overwhelmed by sleepiness and her consciousness became hazier with each passing second. Roland finally turned into the direction of the woman beside him, lifted her veil and slowly moved his face towards her lips. The final scene of her vision became very blurred. When the veil was taken away, Nightingale saw that the woman standing there with closed eyes as if in a trance, was herself. She tilted her lips upwards and fell asleep. Chapter 145 Searching for Traces, Finding the Cause, Part 1. When Theo entered the tavern, his nose was immediately assaulted by a sultry and moist odor mixed together with the smell of the alcohol. Under the dim light, he could see a group of men with their sweaty and bare upper bodies left exposed. They sat around the table at the center, pouring one cup after another of the cheap beer into their mouths, all the while loudly laughing and talking with one another. Then there was maid dressed in revealing clothes brought them all a new round of beer. After looking around the place for a while, he finally found the goal of his coming to this place. A young man was sitting in the corner, which also happened to be the most hidden place in the whole tavern. The only noticeable part of him was the withered wild rose which he had put on the table in front of him. After discovering the man, Theo went to bar, first getting a cup of beer for himself. While slowly tasting the bitter flavor of the beer, he discreetly screened the room to see whether there were any other eyes that showed any interest to the little man. The result was very satisfactory, although there would occasionally be some people that would look at the corner. Most of them were unintentional movements. Only one man, sitting at the central table, was constantly keeping watch over the corner trying to mask it by drinking his beer. One person as a contractor, one person as a lookout, the typical method used by shady street rats. This was also identical of Theo's knowledge. "Once more cup," he shouted to the bartender, "with ice." "Sir, for a beer on the rocks you have to pay double," the bartender reminded him. Hearing this, Theo threw a silver royal in his direction. The more ice, the better. Holding his cup with the white mist coming out of it, he went across to the little man, placed his beer on the table so that it swept over the wild rose. The cold beer flowed along the petals. Seeing this happen, the little man raised his head and looked impatiently at Theo. "Good beer is meant for drinking, not for the table. What madness has befallen you?" An offer to the wild rose, Theo teasingly spoke as he took a seat across from the little men. "I've been looking for you for a long time now." "That only proves that you haven't been looking in the right places," he replied in a raspy voice. "That being the case, as a client, tell me now, what do you want from me? Are you asking for clues, scrounging, redeem lost goods, or do you want to get rid of some stolen good? No, I hope you can help me with spreading a rumor. That doesn't fall into the business area of the wild roses." He shook his head. No, don't be so fast to jump to conclusions. As long you get paid with gold royals, you will be surely interested in this. Theo shook his finger. I am not one of those layman youngsters. Occasionally, so to ensure that the prey takes the bait, you first have to lay out the bait, and rumors are the best way to achieve this. There won't be any evidence left, and with this there will be no way to catch you. This is much safer than stealing. That sounds reasonable, acknowledged the little man, showing a smile. Have you commissioned anyone else besides the Wild Rose? I completely trust that you can achieve it alone. After all, this is only a small place. Their name also doesn't sound as elegant, and they also don't seem to be as capable. The business area here is just too small, so it's hard to find the right business. The competition within Silver City is vicious. He picked up the rose, shook it, and when it was dry he put it into his pocket. Tell me, what rumor do you want us to spread for you? Some news about the witches, Theo laughed. An organization with the name of Witch Cooperation Association has found the Holy Mountain. They were also able to get rid of the pain during the demon's bite, gaining eternal peace. Bro, this news is, the little man smacked his lips, really outdated. Although I will rarely step away from trying to scam someone, your gossip should at least be a little believable. Let me guess, in case you aren't trying to abduct a witch, then it sounds like you want to ensnare the church, which is the same as just waiting to be sent to the gallows by a group of judges, so I think it should be the first option. Showing a vulgar smile, unfortunately, as far as I know, most of the witch hunters who've wanted to catch a witch by now are all already dead. Even though they were all carrying a god stone of retaliation on them, those women, after all, aren't just some idiots. Why shouldn't it be believable? Theo asked curiously. An organization formed by witches would be as flashy as the moon during the night. If it were true, the church would undoubtedly flock to it. So, if I were a witch, I would naturally never go to such a place. In case the news was a fake, then there would be no reason for me to go. As for getting rid of the demon's bite, my man, are you serious? The witches are the devil's messenger. Even the witches themselves would snort disdainfully at hearing such a pack of lies. Then come forth according to this statement, Theo disagreed. In the end, the customer always has the final say. The young man just shrugged his shoulders. It doesn't matter to me, just don't come to me afterward and say that I didn't warn you. This job will cost you 20 gold royals. One-time payment? Yes, the Wild Rose does not take deposits, nor anything other than money. He spread his arms. This business relies entirely on sincerity. Theo sighed, but then he took out a small money bag from his pocket. Turning it around and letting 19 gold royals fall onto the table, he then took another money bag from his belt and put another 100 silver royals on the table and pushed everything to in front of the young man. The latter just checked the authenticity of one of the gold royals and afterward swept everything into his own bag. Will the news reach the witch's ear? The moment he had received his money, the little man's face became a lot friendlier. The Wild Rose has accepted your commission. It's nearly impossible that we cannot get the accepted jobs done. Just like I had previously said, the competition within Silver City is cruel. In case we would ever try to deceive our customers, or if anything was to happen to them, our reputation would definitely fall. If you don't want to rush back towards the west and wait for someone else to take the bait, you can always stay here for the next few days. It won't be long before you will hear the news spread all over the place. Of course, only for as long as they are willing to speak about it. I'll keep it short and wish you success on your hunt, and if you ever manage to catch one, don't bring them to the church. You can make more money by selling them to the aristocrats. And if you cannot find the right person or you're too afraid of being found by the church, you can always come back to us. We will only take a small introduction fee. With this offer, the young man stood up, took the bag and left the tavern. It didn't take long before the person responsible for keeping the young man safe also stood up and left. In the next 15 minutes, Theo just waited and drank his cup of beer, then belched and also left the pub. With this, the task given by His Highness has finally come to an end, he thought. Fallen Dragon Ridge, Redwater City, Silver City, he had visited them all. Always searching for the local street rats, letting them spread the news up to the last corner of the city. There were always such hidden organizations, even the King's City was no exception to this. Such organizations were able to reach places and spread news he could never contact using the legal ways. How successful they were only depended on how much money the customer had already offered. The only difficulty in this job was to find the contractor, he had to say. As an outsider it was quite difficult to get their trust. Only if he used the right phrase would they try to talk him, but to receive the sentence, he had already had to pay at least 5 gold royals. Theo lamented within his heart, if I hadn't already had similar experiences in King's City, I am afraid I would never have been able to leave the Fallen Dragon Ridge. On the way back to his inn, he noticed that there was something not quite right. Someone is tracking me. Although the other party was very subtle, as a professional bodyguard, Theo immediately became aware of the other's existence. He pulled out the dagger at his waist, and turned at the next corner, entering an unknown alley. Are they from the Wild Rose? He had purposely turned his money bag inside out when he had paid the 19 gold royals, this way he wanted to avoid the other side becoming greedy. In general, hundreds of silver royals weren't enough for them to go after an already accepted customer. He pressed his back against the wall, counting the ever-approaching footsteps. The moment the other person was about to pass by the ally he fiercely rushed out from his hideout, instantly pressing his dagger against the unknown person's neck. Don't move. Theo lowly hissed. But he would have never expected that the other one would just turn into fog, disappearing. It's a witch. The moment he realized it and wanted to shout out, was the moment he received a severe blow to the back of the neck. Immediately becoming dizzy, then losing all of his strength and unable to keep himself from falling to the ground. Chapter 146 Searching for Traces, Finding the Cause, Part 2. When Theo regained his consciousness, he could still feel a stabbing pain from the back of his neck. Damn, that brute of a woman had hit him really hard. He opened his eyes and tried to move, only to discover that his hands were tied behind his back and his legs were tied to the legs of the chair he was sitting on. He woke up, suddenly the voice of a woman could be heard. What is your name? One person stepped in front of him and raised his chin. I suggest that you do not lie, or tomorrow you will already have become just another floating corpse in the moat. Theo had to blink to see clearer. The woman in front of him was wearing a veil, and her body was shrouded in a robe. Apparently, she didn't want him to be able to recognize her appearance. Theo, he answered truthfully, at the same time he secretly looked around. It was a narrow room, and his surrounding was covered in dust and pieces of plaster from a broken statue. Even though it was once complete, now merely one half of it was left. The accumulated dust and plaster had already begun to turn brown as if it had already been abandoned for a long time. The room was without windows, so no sky could be seen and he could only speculate on how late it was. The only light in the room came from an oil lamp hanging on the wall. From the Fallen Dragon Ridge to Silver City, such a long way, continued the woman in a cold voice. Why are you looking for us? I am not looking for you, it's the Witch Cooperation Association who is looking for you. What is an association? It's a group of witches just like you. They had entrusted me with the task of spreading their news. Nonsense, the woman snapped. I do not know where you had heard their name, but they are located far to the east, in the Seawind region. Do you think that just by randomly throwing names into the room we would believe you? The woman drew a knife from her waist and Theo had to discover that it was the knife that he had previously used. I'll give you one last chance, don't challenge my patience. What I said was the truth. He stated in a loud voice. He wanted to continue to shout, but in the end, he didn't dare, so he said with a suppressed voice. They had originally intended to go into the impassable mountain range, trying to find the Holy Mountain. Unable to find the Holy Mountain, they had to settle down in Border Town, only to discover that the symptoms of the demon's bite had disappeared. When they realized this, they naturally wanted to save other witches. I swear I did not lie. Then why would they send you? 'Cause I helped them when one of their members was chased by the church's army of judges. I helped her by distracting her pursuers. Their mentor is called Kara, and there are also Wendy and Scroll. They asked me to go. After listening to his explanation, the masked woman turned silent. She put the dagger back to her waist and stepped behind him. Soon, Theo could hear how the two women whispered behind his back. Fledglings, he commented in his heart, even though the two of them act like criminals, it is still clear that they are entirely new to interrogating. During an interrogation, it is absolutely taboo to ask questions that had only one answer. In the case that they didn't get their answer, the questioner only had the choice to kill or not to kill. If they decide to kill, they will lose any further possibility of receiving any more information. If they didn't kill, it's as equivalent to losing their threat of dying. This would severely damage the interrogator's position of power, and the effectiveness of the next threat would be substantially reduced. If he were the interrogator, he would start the torture with the fingers. For every lie, one finger would be cut off. So even if there were an error in judgment, it would become a big problem. Under this threatening atmosphere, the enemy's heart would quickly collapse, but without professional training, it would be very tough to carry out such a trial. As long as he would show a frightened look, the interrogator would become unsure, which is equally to exposing that they just cannot tell whether he was lying or telling the truth. And Kara, Holy Mountain, and the Witch Cooperation Association were reliable and genuine information, which would further strengthen the persuasiveness of his information. It didn't take long before the masked woman appeared once more in front of him. When was it that they entered the Western Territory? 2 or 3 months before the months of demons, and directly after the end of winter, they returned to the town, claiming that they had found the Holy Mountain. How many people are they? Up to 40? I'm not sure of it. In addition to Kara, there are almost no other witches who decided to show themselves. Theo decided to add another bit of information. Kara the Snake Witch, have you heard of her? She has the ability to summon magical snakes. One of them is called Nothingness. With her, she can quickly erase every toxin. I have seen it myself, it was very powerful. You actually do not fear the witches? The woman's voice seemed to be a bit puzzled. Why should I be afraid? The witches are very beautiful, they don't possess claws like demonic beasts, and furthermore they don't hurt ordinary people. If I feared them, I would have never gone so far to spread the news. If someone went to Border Town, how could they contact them? Some of them can naturally see magic, so if there is a witch, they will find her. Shadow, what do you think? The masked women looked into the direction behind Theo. I'm not sure. The witch, known as Shadow, hesitated. Shouldn't we wait for our sister and then make a decision? She surely will know what to do. All right. She nodded and took a clean chair, sitting herself in front of Theo. Who is your older sister? The guide, the masked woman's attitude had softened a lot compared to before. Probably his statement that he didn't fear the witches changed her thoughts and feelings a lot. She will take us away from here. You will leave? Where will you go to? The spoken to just shook her head and didn't answer. You are not a witch from Silver City, right? Theo continued, your accent is not the same as the accent of the king. Silver City was near the capital, so the inhabitants here are proud of imitating the king's accent. She hesitated for a moment. I am from the south. Witches from all over the kingdom have gathered here, and soon they will be led away from here. Theo thought to himself, there is no doubt, they are another witch organization. They are also attracting witches, just like the Witch Cooperation Association had done before. However, in the end, where do they want to go? At this moment, from outside the sound of footsteps could be heard. Sister came back. Shadow shouted cheerfully. With the creaking sound of the door opening, Theo began to hold his breath. Is he the one who has been using the underground channels to spread the news? The newcomer's voice was mature and steady. What have you asked him? What he had said seems to be true. Began the masked woman to explain how she saw the questioning. He could not have been so clear in his explanation if he had not been in contact with the Witch Cooperation Association. Well, there's that, she went by Theo, stepping in front of him. There was a big difference between her and the masked woman, she didn't hide her face. Her long black hair nearly reached her waist, and she seemed to be around 25 years old. Taking her in whole, the most eye-catching part of her were her eyes. Theo discovered that she unexpectedly had golden irises. Even standing in the dim light, her eyes were still clearly visible just like the stars during the night. Theo had often been at His Highness' side, but the unknown woman's appearance could still be considered as belonging the top category. She had a visible scar over her left eye, beginning at her brow and going down to her cheek. This scar not only did not destroy her beauty but instead added another harsh touch to it. From the first moment that he saw her, Theo felt that this woman was a full-fledged warrior. If the Witch Cooperation Association had indeed found the holy mountain, they would have never sent people to spread such news. She shook her head. This wouldn't only let the church getting wind of it and let them arrive, no, they would even have to leave border town as soon as possible. I'm afraid they would only bring a great calamity over themselves. Then, what should we do? Shadow asked. The ship will arrive today at midnight, and you aren't the only witches, so you will have to leave, she said without hesitation. I'll escort you to the ship. As for the why, the black-haired woman looked at Theo, who was still tied to the chair. Please help me to say hello to Tilly. Tell her I'll be late for a few days and perhaps I'm even be able to bring some more witches with me. You want to go with him to Border Town? Shadow asked, surprised, but, in case this is a hoax. She smiled a little and said, full of confidence, if that were the case, it would be the same as killing oneself. Chapter 147 Missionary Mission. Alicia had never thought that she would one day become a member of a missionary mission. After all, when the church sent people on such a mission, the group would always be formed from elite warriors who were also well versed in letters and military tactics, since they would represent the face of the church the entire time they were away. She was very confident in her fighting skills and her etiquette. It could even be said that she looked like, the whole year I'm constantly moving along the defensive line, always holding and waving my double-edged greatsword. Can such a woman be good-looking when she has to go somewhere? Thinking of this, her whole body was covered in a feeling of unease. The priestess Mira had said that they had to go to the western border town of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, investigating the case of the royal power housing and shielding some witches. In addition to the priestess who led the envoy, the group also consisted of 10 judges, one of them being the captain who had given her the cold pill during the defense of Hermes. But it seemed that even away from the battlefield, he was still constantly wearing his cold face, and just by standing beside him Alicia could feel how the temperature drastically fell. The priestess instead was the completely opposite expression. She was already over the age of 40, and had a pair of wise and far-seeing eyes. Always telling and laughing about anecdotes of the church, she clearly had a lot of experience, full of passion for others' interest but never losing her elegant demeanor as she went. Even in the presence of the archbishop, her aura wouldn't reduce. More than once, Alicia had heard that she was the likeliest candidate to be the next bishop. And to the warrior's surprise, as a public official, Myra's writing skills were not much worse than the skills of the judges. For the past 2 days, she had spent most of her time in front of the troops, leading them ever further down the mountain trail, bypassing the forests, cities, and towns, so that she could always keep the horses going at the same speed and try to reduce the physical exertion. This technique was just like that of an experienced long-term rider. When they left the Hermes boundary and entered the Kingdom of Grey Castle, one of the judges asked, "We aren't going further south?" "No, the distance between Border Town and where we are is too far. If we take the land route, my buttocks will start to bloom just like flowers." Mira waved her hand disapprovingly. "We will first go eastwards until we reach the Hidden Valley town. There is a river which flows to Redwater City and from there it won't be much further before we reach Longsong Stronghold." "When was it that you first joined the church?" Alicia asked curiously. "Not only do you know all sorts of anecdotes about things that happened in the Holy City, but you also know a lot about the world at large." "I joined the church 12 years ago, when I was 30, Mira replied. "That's quite late," Alicia exclaimed. "As far as I know, the older one is, the more difficult it would become to comprehend the doctrines of God. It is even more shocking that it only took you 10 years to be promoted from the rank of a believer to that of a priestess." "Yes, well," Mira smiled, "this is one of the enchanting aspects of the church. I was originally the daughter of a merchant and traveled together with my father through the 4 kingdoms to sell goods. Goods that are common at some places at other locations are rare and because of this worth much more. For example, the price for green coral, when we bought it from local fishermen in the Seawind region, we could buy them for a price of only 20 to 30 silver royals. We put them into water tanks and transported them the whole way northward to Imperial Palace of the Kingdom of Endless Winter. If the transport was successful and the corals still had their natural color, and were without any broken branches, we could sell them for 5 or more gold royals. I often thought, it's obviously that they are the same item, so how can it be that there is such an enormous difference in their value? Because, in some places they are rare? Alicia suggested. At the beginning I thought the same. Mira nodded in agreement, but then something happened that changed my view. One noble secretly harbored a witch who was able to control the temperature. After some tests he finally came up with a way in which he could keep and raise the corals of the Seawind region in the Kingdom of Eternal Winter. He turned the basement of a house in his garden into a huge pond, setting some skylights into its ceiling. With this he could harvest the corals once a year. His output was 10 times more than what my father was able to transport, and we were only able to make the journey once a year. So, there were now much more green corals on the market than before. He not only sold them to the palace, but also to other powerful aristocratic families. If the price was only decided by its rarity, the expensive price of green corals should go down. But after 2 years, the palace refused to accept those low-priced green corals, saying that they were counterfeit goods. Not only had my father not cut down on the prices of the green corals, no, he had even doubled it. As for the noble with the witch, he became confined by the church, according to the crime of harboring and kidnapping of a witch. He was burned at stake. But I knew that the corals sold by him were no counterfeit products. There was no difference between them and my father's product. Thinking it's because of the reason that the items are rare, isn't the wrong idea, but there are many other reasons which also determine the price of goods. Furthermore, this was only one of the simplest examples. Because the royal palace thought of the green corals as a symbol of luxury, they artificially set its value to be higher. When more green corals appeared on the market, it would also significantly impact the provisions of the royal family. Therefore, at the day of execution, the queen also celebrated. Don't you think that these goods are the same as a secular people? Like, what? Alicia couldn't follow her thought process. Just like the children of royalty and commoners, Mira spoke without stop. When they are born, they all get a price attached to them, but this price doesn't reflect our real value. We are just like those green corals, yet sometimes they can be bought for a low price, but at other places, the price becomes too high to even reach. Too high to be reached, you mean becoming nobility? Nobles are the corals of the royal's palace of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter. The priestess smiled. When they and we are born, there is no difference between us. We both have a pair of hands, a pair of feet, a pair of eyes and a mouth. However, they were artificially classified as beings of the highest value. This inequality isn't based on their own ability, but on the rule of the royal power. Because of this, I joined the church. At least in the holy city, your origin does not limit your value. If we could put the whole continent under the rule of the Holy Church, establishing the so-called Kingdom of God, it would be the case for everyone. You are right, that would truly be a good thing. Alicia wholeheartedly and thought excited. It would be like heaven on earth. If we were able to establish a kingdom under the rule of God. Just like Mira had described it, there would be no difference between the people when they were born, nor would there exist any pariah or slaves. A kingdom of God? Well, do you want to turn all the people into cold-blooded monsters? The cold-faced captain of the army of judges shook the reins of his horse, and joined up with them. Priestess, how much do you know about the God's punishment army? Hey, you. Alicia was about to remind him to pay attention to courtesy, but she was already stopped halfway by Mira. The God punishment army is the gathering of the most powerful warriors of the church. They also possess the strongest faith, willing to sacrifice themselves. Only the brave and fearless members of the army of judges can be transformed. Them being the most powerful is a good point. That they need to be transformed to be able to join the army is also not bad, but they aren't the most converted of us soldiers. No, they are nothing more than a group of people without any feelings, just like monsters. After coldly dropping this sentence, he went to his horse and rode it back to the front of his team. He is simply a rude one, Alicia bitterly said, when she had seen him at Hermes. Even so, they had to face danger. He was exactly like a general he had to be, both calm and brave. But now, what had happened to him, that he had become such a kind of person? It's okay, he's just not in the mood right now. Mira shook her head. To build the kingdom of God, there will be setbacks and sacrifices, but at least we all joined voluntarily. It was already late when they arrived at the next town, and as missionaries on a mission of the church they were allowed to rest in the town's church. After everyone had eaten, they all went back to their own room to sleep. Alicia was walking behind the captain, but when they reached an aisle, she suddenly called out to him. Mira is our leader, what was the meaning behind your outbreak during the ride? Did you forget all the rules and regulations of the church? After a moment of silence, he asked, your name is Alicia, isn't it? Yes, and just like you, I'm now a captain in the army of Judge. At the fight during the month of demons I had asked you for your name, but you didn't give me an answer. Are you now able to tell me your name? Abrams, he said with a blank expression, as to why I did that. Do you have any brothers or sisters? No. Alicia suddenly remembered that he had said that his brother was a member of the God's Punishment Army. I have. He and I grew up in the church, we were so close that we would always know what the other was thinking. Later, he accepted the invitation and transferred to the God's Punishment Army. Since that day I have never seen him again. The presiding judge told me that his transformation was very successful and that he was now out on a special mission of the church. I was euphoric for him. He paused until one day, I finally saw him again in the cathedral. I shouted his name, and when he came up to me, I wanted to embrace him. But can you guess what I saw? Asking this, Abram's face showed for the first time some feelings, pain. He acted like a stranger, he didn't see me at all, he just walked straight past me. Never turning his eyes in my direction, always staring to the front, ultimately acting, unlike a human. Hearing his story, Alicia could feel a cold chill running down her back. She wanted to shout that he had lied, but when she opened her mouth, no such words could escape. The member of the God's Punishment Army are deprived of their human feelings, they are nothing more than a group of living dead. He pushed Alicia to the side and walked back to his room, not looking back as he left. Chapter 148 The Merchant from King City, Part 1. Border Town welcomed the long-missed rainy weather. From the dark clouds in the sky, the rains came splashing down onto the earth, hitting the windowsills and the windows, creating a loud crackling sound the whole time. It was reasonable to say that the spring was meant to be a rainy season, both warm and humid. But this year in Border Town, since the end of the months of demons, the number of rainy days they've had could be counted on one hand. Fortunately, the farmland was directly beside the river, which made the watering very convenient. Now, due to the heavy rain they received, the oppressive air had finally dispersed. So now, as Nightingale opened a window, the room was flooded by the rich fragrance of Mother Earth. From afar, you could see the sprouting crops on the other side of the Shurshui River. The horizon was covered with endless amounts of green wheat seedlings. Now, washed by the rain, these crops sparkled dazzlingly in contrast to the gray water of the river. Roland stretched his body and put the pen back into its container. Seeing that he had finished, Nightingale finally asked, "Did the blueprint turn out well?" "Well, it is an entirely new weapon, with its fire rate increased by several times," Roland said, placing the blueprint on the stack together with more than a dozen of designs. "I'll call it the rotating rifle. What do you think?" "You don't need to show it to me," Nightingale said, showing an ironical smile. "I wouldn't understand it anyway. This is just the primary type. If the barrel gets shortened, it will become a revolver, which you can also carry around with you. However, even if it would come in handy to have it, I still first have to solve a missing key piece of technology. But, when the time comes and I can give it to you, you no longer need to fear the army of judges coming from the church." "You mean, it will allow an ordinary woman to kill a heavily armed knight?" "Not only one, but several," Roland smirked. "If you're lucky, then 5 powerful men also wouldn't be a problem." Nightingale exposed a look full of disbelieving. The moment when he wanted to say something further, a knocking sound could suddenly be heard coming from outside the office. "Your Royal Highness," Barev's apprentice who was sent to the capital, came just back. He brought a merchant with him who trades in saltpeter. At the moment the merchant is waiting outside of the castle for you to receive them. What apprentice of Berev? When Roland thought about it, only one thing came to mind. Before the attack on the Longsong stronghold, border town's stock of gunpowder was running low, and he had sent some guards to the fallen Dragon Ridge and Redwater City, hoping to obtain a new source of saltpeter. Berev's apprentice was the last to be sent on his journey. His destination was King's City. After all, they should have all kinds of goods over there. Coupled with the approaching summer, this meant the production of saltpeter would certainly be significantly increased. He had never expected that the last person he had sent out would be the first to come back with good news. Bring them to the reception room, and I'll join them soon. Roland looked out the window at the sky, and let the kitchen prepare another portion of dessert. Turning back around, he saw that Nightingale had already disappeared. But he knew that she was as always at his side. Later, when Roland entered the reception room, the merchant was only just now brought into the room by the guards. She took off her wet cloak and straw hat, then bowed in front of the prince, showing her respect. I am Margaret Farman, a merchant from King's City. Today I'm here to salute you, your formidable highness Wimbledon. Seeing that the merchant was actually a woman was completely unexpected to Roland. During this era, the traveling routes were much less safe than during the later times. Traveling around, one may not only encounter bandits or refugees, but the towns also had many underground forces, not to forget there was still the dangerous wildlife to take into consideration, so seeing a woman working as a merchant was quite rare. Like lightning, she had bright blonde hair, but her hair was thicker and longer. She should be around 30 years old, and perhaps because of living a harder life than that of the ordinary people, she already had wrinkles around the eyes and on her forehead. Her skin color was also darker than the kingdom's people. At first glance her appearance seemed a little rough. But it was clear that she didn't belong to the Sand People, but rather to the people of the fjord. Sit down, the prince said, motioning that she could take a seat. You aren't an original citizen of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, are you? Why would you ask that? Margaret smiled. The color of your hair, it is a very rare sight to see from people of the mainland. As far as I know, most people coming from the other side of the Vortex Sea have such pretty blonde hair. I also know an explorer from the fjords. You are very knowledgeable. My hometown is indeed in the fjord. But I have already left the fjords and come to the mainland more than a decade ago. Today I'm living in the capital, and can be considered as a half-citizen of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. She paused. Since it wasn't so long ago that you've left the capital yourself, it is possible that we have already met somewhere before. To be able to live in the same city as your highness, I feel very honored. Sure enough, a successful businessman is splendid at speaking. Even knowing that the other side was just flattering him, Roland still got a pleasant feeling. However, right at this moment, he could feel how his right side was suddenly pinched. This time you didn't need to determine if she was telling the truth or not. Nightingale, you're too enthusiastic about doing your duty. In the fjords, being an explorer isn't just a hollow title. Margaret continued earnestly, you may not understand, but the land where the people can survive is very scarce in the fjords, where the water rises and falls. Some islands will be swallowed at high tide, while other islands spew flames and smoke all day long, and they have such a high temperature that even the stone melts, converging all into a dark red river. Only those who open up new channels, or find a new suitable place for people to live, are eligible to get this title. So there aren't many people who proclaim themselves explorer. Haha, not only does she call herself an explorer, she also claims her father to be the greatest explorer. Roland smiled and shook his head. Well, children, they like to imagine themselves as great people. In the fjord, even the child will not so easily claim that title. Margaret frowned up. Did she ever mention her father's name? Seeing the earnest look on her face, Roland also realized that had he misread the situation, can it possibly be that for the sea folk take the title of explorer as something they believe in spiritually? Is it possible that it cannot be called so casually? Her father's name is Thunder. Roland had never expected that the moment he said the name, Marguerite's eyes became big and round. You know Sir Thunder? No, I only know his daughter. How is it possible that you've heard of the name? No one in the fjords hasn't heard the stories of him. Sir Thunder, the Twin Dragon Islands and the Shallow Water Island were discovered by him. With this he expanded our living area by almost half. He also painted a detailed map of the East Coast and the Shadow Island. Now, every child of the fjords knows of the deeds of Sir Thunder. He is one of the greatest explorers of the fjords. But I heard that Thunder seemed to be buried in the sea because of a storm. No, Your Royal Highness, a real explorer will never fall because of a storm. He has faced numerous dangers, but in the end, he has always survived. At the moment Sir Thunder must be somewhere gathering the crew for a new expedition, just like he has always done. Margaret leaned forward. Your Highness, would you happen to know where his daughter could be right now? Roland was still a little surprised. He had never thought that Lightning's father was actually so famous. Can it be that her tales, which sounded so much like fantasy, were all true? She lives here in my castle. After the shipwreck, she has kept traveling westwards until she reached Border Town, when I happened to meet her, and I took her in. In your castle? Margaret was full of expectation. Can I see his daughter? For now, most probably not, Roland said. At the moment, Lightning should be flying over the concealing forest, looking for the site marked on the treasure map. She is currently practicing, taking a jungle adventure. But if you plan to stay overnight, you can wait until she comes back. Then I'll wait and I will talk with her later. Margaret nodded without hesitation. Then we can now discuss business, right? Of course, Your Royal Highness, Margaret answered laughingly. Do not hesitate to speak your mind. Chapter 149 Merchant from King City, Part 2. Are you King City's biggest saltpeter trader? Roland directly cut to root. No, Your Highness. Margaret was no longer just showing her formal smile, her speech also became much more intimate. I run all kind of different businesses, from gems to cloth, from inns to taverns. In fact, not even a month ago, I still had nothing to do with saltpeter trading. Only when the original owner of the nitrate field lost all of his reserves and went bankrupt during his visit in my casino, did I have the rights transferred to me as payment. Not only was she selling all kinds of goods, she even had a firm hold in the service industry, being able to build such a large business empire. In the end, what background did she have? It was well known that if you wanted to open a casino in King City, with money alone it would be an impossible thing to achieve. Wanting to know if she was telling him the truth, Roland knocked on the table, but Nightingale pinched to the middle of his back left him unsatisfied. Since a pinch like this indicated that Margaret was carrying a godstone of retaliation, making it impossible for her to judge whether the other one was telling a lie or telling the truth. Wait a moment, since it's impossible for her to observe, why did she pinch me so hard previously? Roland coughed twice, suppressing his curiosity. He had heard that some of the merchants from the fjords had settled down in the Four Kingdoms. Their businesses were so successful that they grew bigger and bigger until they accumulated so much wealth that it became hard to even imagine it. After finally securing some wealth, many merchants were easy marks and were effortlessly swindled out of their gains. Only a few were able to stabilize themselves and put down roots, and reinvest their money successfully into local establishments, forming a relatively stable business union. Can it be that Margaret is one of those big dogs? This being the case, Roland decided to be direct and straightforward with his request. I need a large amount of saltpeter, the more, the better. The western territory of the kingdom isn't a scorching place, especially near the impassable mountain range. Your Royal Highness, do you really need so much saltpeter? Margaret became curious. In the eastern outskirts of the kingdom, I have 3 nitrate fields, enough to supply a middle-sized city of nobles with ice. Definitely a big shot. She even has 3 nitrate fields. Even though Roland became overjoyed, there was no visible change in his expression. I'm going to build a cold store in the basement of the castle to store some perishable food. As long as you give me the right price, I'll take all the saltpeter you can bring. Since you've explained it so clearly to me, she nodded, I'm willing to transport all of my saltpeter to Border Town, and I will only charge you the typical market price of King City, but what? I do not want to be paid with gold royals. I already have enough of them to fill up a whole warehouse. I heard that you were in possession of some foreign products. If you used these instead of the gold royals, I would be happy to conclude a deal with you. Strange products? Roland got rooted. It was the first time that he had heard someone say that he didn't want any gold royals. Yes, well, I heard something about a self-running black iron creation. Margaret leaned slightly forward. Your servant said that with this thing, you only need to ignite a fire and boil water for it to become amazingly powerful. In fact, only after I heard him speak about such a creation did I decide to visit Border Town. Otherwise, directly selling the saltpeter to the nobility around the capital would be much more in line with my interests. After all, the transportation distance is many times farther, so I have to bear a significant loss. This is really a pleasant surprise, Roland thought. Although I don't know how Barev's apprentice caught hold of this line, and in what way he had described the steam engine, but evidently this merchant from King City was very interested in it. How incredible the profits and business potential of industrial products were, was all very clear to Roland. Especially since they could be only created by his own mechanical products. He had already worried about that after Border Town had sold all the ore and used up all the Duke's coins, that they would have no other business opportunities. But he would never have thought that today such an excellent opportunity such as this would be put right in front of him. So, that was your reason, the prince said. What you had heard of is called a steam engine. It converts water by boiling it into steam, which can be used as a source of power. The principle behind it is very simple, but only we here in Border Town are able to produce it. So there exists really such an amazing thing? Of course, Roland answered, but it is very complicated to manufacture, so the price will be quite high. If you are interested, you can go with me to see the machine. Extremely interested, she said with excitement. In the North Slope mine, Margaret saw a large roaring steel monster which pulled several mine carts loaded with minerals out of the mine tunnel. Her eyes turned full and round, nearly falling out of their sockets. Your Royal Highness, this is incredible. Margaret whispered, feeling overwhelmed. Previously I had thought that your messenger had exaggerated, but even in my wildest dreams, I had never thought that he even understated it. I am afraid that even a dozen of people together don't possess a power such as this steam engine. Wanting to take a closer look, Margaret took a step toward the engine but was stopped by Roland. The running is very dangerous, don't get too close to it. Do you see the white gas spraying out of it? Even if you only get hit by a small part of it, it is still enough to burn your skin. Do you only use it to transport ore? As the noise was too large, she had to step near Roland and shout into his ear. In this mine, we using two, one is used to help the miner transport the ore, while the second one is used for pumping out the water in the mine, Roland replied. In fact, until today, Border Town was only able to produce 3 steam engines. We use them there where they are needed the most. But they can be employed for a broad range of purposes, as you could perhaps imagine. They can replace windmills and water wheels to grind wheat. They aren't affected by rivers or winds, and they don't need any manpower or animal power. What might interest you, even more, is that they can even be fitted onto a sailing boat, moving the paddles, allowing the ship to move without any sails. He knew that their dependence on the wind and its direction was of great significance for the sea folk. Sure enough, hearing this, Margaret looked with wide-open eyes at Roland. Just name a price, I will take it with me. That's out of the question, the mine also relies on it to maintain the production. You can order a few new steam engines and then when you deliver the saltpeter, you can take them with you. What would their price be? Roland led her away from the entrance of the mine. Being further away from the noise of the machine, it was now much easier to speak. 1 steam engine will cost 500 gold royals, Roland offered. Even so, the price was a bit exaggerated, being almost equivalent to a knight's territory annual income. The ore to produce 1 steam engine cost around 20 gold royals, plus melting costs, labor costs and installation costs it would be another 50 gold royals. However, to get a good price, one always had to have some space for a bargain. Then I'll buy 10 steam engines. Roland became frozen. 10 steam engines were the same as 5,000 gold royals. Almost the equal to the 5 or 6 years of the Duke Ryan's savings. Not even trying to bargain, was that the power of a big dog? He cleared his throat. You're sure of it? After all, it's not a small sum, and the machine is also not always available for usage, and even if you bought it, you still have to invest money into it. I know, It's just like a ship which has to visit the dock every year to clean up the keel of parasites and algae, replacing the sails, ropes and so on. Margaret did not mind it. What later needs to be added, I'll buy it from you. If it actually becomes impossible to manage by myself, you only have to name a price, and I will pay you for the craftsman to maintain and operate the machine. Roland closed his mouth. There was only one thought left in his mind: being wealthy really must be nice. Chapter 150 Stone Tower. At this moment lightning was flying somewhere across the concealing forest. In her eyes, it seemed that the world had become smaller. As far as her eyes could see, all the details had faded, only a world made out of pure colors was left. Brown was the earth, gray were the mountains, green the forest and blue the river. Yet it was this green which occupied an overwhelming majority of her field of view. And not the bright green of the grass fields and border town. Here the green was mixed with gray and black, turning it dark and condensed. Whether it was to the west or the north, everywhere she looked, she only saw a dark green, with no end to it in sight. Due to seeing it for such a long time, she slowly developed a feeling of falling. So, from time to time, lightning had to look up at the sky, to disperse the ever-increasing feeling of discomfort. Behind her, the overcast black clouds were flowing past very low, enclosing the impassable mountain range and border town in rain and fog. She was now flying over the forest trying to find the remains from 450 years ago. For her, this was undoubtedly a great adventure. 2 weeks ago, when Roland had offered her this task, Lightning immediately accepted this mission. Furthermore, there was a big difference between Kara, who thought of the ancient book as infallible, and the prince. His Highness repeatedly explained to her that this drawing could only be used as a reference and that the most important part of the search was her safety. It wouldn't matter if she could find the tower or not. This gave the young girl the impression that she would have a great time. She knew that His Royal Highness was right, even in case that it was Border Town's castle. Over the period of more than 400 years, the plants would have grown almost everywhere and gradually turned into a pile of dust. But she still wanted to find this place. To determine the location of the hexagonal star, it was the equal to determine the position of Tequila. Having heard the ins and outs of the matter, Lightning naturally understood what it meant for her to find Tequila. That she was helping the prince find the real cause of the outbreak of the war with the devils, which the church was trying to hide with all their might. If she compared this with her father's exciting explorations trying to find new sea routes, it was even more exciting. For her search, Lightning used the chart method. She had separated the map into many small squares, and with keeping a constant speed and counting the time that she flew, she would know how far she had flown. At the same time, she consistently drew out the inside of one of the squares. Every time one of the squares was filled, she also knew that the area had already been searched through. Now she had already filled half of these squares. The stormy clouds behind her seemed to be approaching faster than Lightning had previously imagined. The young girl could even faintly hear the thunder rolling in the clouds. To be safe, she lowered her height, dropping down towards the forest. At this moment, a gray shadow flashed past her vision, shocking Lightning, who immediately stopped her forward flight. Instead, she hovered in the air, looking back through the mass of green. But she could find nothing. Was it an illusion? Lightning thought. Not believing it, she decided to search the area again. But this time, she flew at a much lower height. The forest was no longer one solid block of green, instead turning into a collection of mottled tree trunks, bifurcated branches, and all kinds of different leaves. In front of Lightning's eyes, the details of the world had emerged from a solid block of green. After several scores of breaths, Lightning suddenly detected a small white stone tower hidden behind the tree branches. The complete upper part of the tower had been cut off, leading to the problem that the trees had grown higher than the tower and had covered it with a layer of green, making it nearly impossible to be seen from up in the sky. If not for her wish to avoid the rain-laden clouds, she would most likely have missed it. Lightning's heart began to beat faster. Could it be that this was the location marked on the map? She slowly flew several rounds around the tower but didn't discover any unusual circumstances, so she decided to take a closer look to see what she could detect. After landing, the witch only found out that it wasn't right to call it a white stone tower. Its surface was covered with vines and moss. During the passing of time the tower had now become a gray-green. The tower was slightly tilted to the side, giving the impression that it had been hit by a huge force, which had filled the surrounding with scattered stones. These stones were made from the same material and color as the stone tower and must have been fragments from the tower's former top. The larger pieces were still clear to see, but the smaller ones had already been buried under soil and weeds. The former stone tower was certainly huge. Even now, the bottom area was still as large as Border Town's castle. Ruins like this would usually have a basement. Logically speaking, the right thing to do was to record the location of the remains and then immediately return to the Border Town. The various adventures she had heard also all reminded her that stepping into an already for hundreds of years sleeping ruin wasn't the right choice. For example, the stale air in the sealed basement could have become toxic and would quickly end her short life. Knowing all this, Lightning still didn't move one bit. Her own curiosity was constantly nagging her. Go in and take a look, it won't take long. Once more, she looked up at the sky, seeing that the formerly relatively blue sky had turned a gloomy dark. Apparently, a storm was coming. With this it's decided, she told herself, flying through the rain would be very uncomfortable, so I can't help it and have to hide in the tower, and if I'm already there, I can also take a quick look. In case I actually discover the basement, I absolutely won't go in by myself. After thinking about it, Lightning's obedience had been suppressed by her curiosity, so she went to the vines and began to search for the entrance. When she found it, she pulled out a knife from her waist and cleaned out a small hole. It was only big enough that she could crawl through it. The door, which was previously made out of wood, had already been eroded away long ago, thus she could now successfully enter the tower. As the top was torn off, she wasn't in need of a torch to see clearly. After circling the bottom of the tower, Lightning had still not discovered anything that was exciting. Apparently, over time all traces of items had been erased by nature. In addition to the remnants of the old walls, there was nothing else left on the ground. Behind a still standing wall, she discovered a hole in the ground, which should be the place of the former stairs, but every trace of them had already been erased. The access to the basement seemed very conspicuous. It was built in the southwest direction of the floor, facing the entrance of the stone tower. Lightning suspected that if she moved along this path into the wildlands, she would discover the ancient tower city Tequila. At this time, the rain began to fall from the sky, hitting Lightning on the nose. To keep herself dry and no better option, she entered the hole and slowly walked into the channel that extended underground. When she turned around a corner, she was stopped by a wooden door. Although the door wasn't completely corroded, it still looked dilapidated. As long as it was only touched a little, the door would surely be torn apart. Soon, the outside rain turned into a downpour, and the crackling sound of the rain hitting the ground gradually became one, turning the chaos into an inseparable sound. Where she stood now, she was safe from the rain, but the water began to flow down into the hole. To avoid getting her shoes wet, Lightning lifted her feet from the ground and began to slowly float upwards. Suddenly, she could vaguely hear a cry, mixed with the rain. It was almost indistinguishable. The sudden sound let all her hairs stand up, and the young girl began to look panicky around. But within the narrow passage, she couldn't detect anything besides the scattered stones. With the help of the faint light coming from outside, she opened her bag and took out a torch and flint from inside, wanting to use some fire to take a better look. At this point, the cry sounded again, but this time it actually seemed like it had come from behind the door. Lightning couldn't help it, she flinched and quickly turned around, losing her hold on her torch, dropping it to the ground, where it with a loud splash entered the water. This time the sound had been much clearer. She could faintly distinguish that it was a woman's voice. Was someone in the basement? Thinking of this idea, she began to sweat. How can this be? The stone tower has already been left here for over 400 years. Furthermore, it is also deeply hidden in the forest. In addition to myself, who else can have arrived here? Help me. When the sound could be heard for the third time, she was sure that the sound actually came from behind the wooden door. Also, it sounded like someone was in distress. Lightning swallowed her saliva and carefully placed her hand on the door, gently pushing against it. The wet and creamy wooden door immediately fell backward, smashing with a muffled bang onto the ground, exposing a tall figure directly in front of her. Lightning felt her blood freeze in her veins. The silhouette looked exactly like the devil's in Soraya's painting. In the dim light, the devil seems to be watching her, its massive body slightly bent forward, holding a huge axe within its hand which only had 3 fingers. In the reflecting light, she could clearly see the blood stains on the axe body. For a moment, the bloody images of these horrible monsters killing her sisters came to her mind. Ah! Her scream echoed through the basement. She threw the flint she was still in her hand into the direction of the devil before she turned around and flew with her fastest speed out of the channel, directly into the rain, fleeing into the direction of Border Town. Lightning did not notice that when the piece of flint smashed in the devil's chest, it created the sound of a crisp crash. The area where it had hit began to crack, quickly spreading until they covered the whole body. The devil's body covered by cracks broke into many fragments, turning into white dust, which then disappeared in the wind. Chapter 151 Negotiations, Part 1. After taking a look at the steam engine, Roland and Margaret returned to the office in the cast to continue their discussion and clear up all the details concerning the business contract. In case that such negotiation included haggling over the price, it was usual that the fight between both sides would need around 1 or 2 days to reach a conclusion. Furthermore, it was generally the finance minister who was responsible for negotiating the contract. The Lord would only get to see the final numbers when he placed his signature. Only that the opposite side had already accepted the price. With this agreement, Roland also ended up saving a lot of effort. I expect the first batch of saltpeter will come in a month. It will be the amount of 3 sailboats full, and I will also follow them to Border Town. After giving the amount, Margaret quickly wrote some numbers on a parchment, calculated in gold royals at the actual market price. The value of the saltpeter will be around 315 gold royals. Until then, Border Town will be able to produce 2 steam engines. Roland deliberately lowered the quantity. They will have a total worth of 1,000 gold royals. You can decide for yourself whether you want to make up the difference with gold royals, or you can also pay us using other resources. What kind of goods do you need? Iron, copper, lead, green vitriol, Roland said. Those are all common minerals, but the first 3 goods I don't need them as raw ore, but as already processed ingots. In addition, I need 10 sets of crystal clear glassware. Since they don't need to have any carving on them, it won't matter if they are in the form of a canteen or a wine cup. But they must be the best quality products of King City Alchemy Workshop. If the price exceeds the difference, I can fill it with gold royals, or it can be deducted from the price of the 2 steam engines delivered the months afterward. It seems you want to treat me as your dedicated trader, Margaret said. Though I do not have a mine, I know a few peers who specialize in the ore trade, but I would have never expected with so few nobles living here, you would still consume such an enormous amount of saltpeter. Furthermore, Border Town was established next to the North Slope mine, yet you still have to buy so many ores. This simply isn't in line with my business sense. Your Highness, your territory is simply too inconceivable. A major trait to industrialize production is its great hunger for raw materials, in exchange for the fast output of finished products. So, Roland continued, later on, Border Town will be in even greater need for more goods, so I think it is for the best if we can reach a long-term trade agreement from now on. At this moment, Margaret suddenly became startled and was looking with a face full of surprise behind Roland. When he saw her unusual behavior, he subconsciously turned his head and discovered Lightning, who soaked through to the skin by rainwater was pressing herself against the window, while still floating in the air. Her face was pale from fear and she frantically pushed against the glass, trying to come in. Her hair stuck as strands to her forehead, and the water from the rain was continuously flowing over her face. In general, she looked as if she had just stepped out of the river. Roland quickly stood up to open the window. As soon as it was possible, Lightning flew into the room, directly into Roland's arms, and her face that was filled with panic soon relaxed, confusing the warm body she felt with memories from her past. Nightingale, quickly go and call Nana, Roland ordered anxiously. Yes. Came immediately the response out of the empty room besides him. What happened to her? In the air, she shouldn't have encountered any demonic beasts, or any of the devils. Or could it be, do they also have the ability to fly? Roland roughly checked Lightning's condition, and after he didn't find any obvious signs of trauma, he finally felt a little relief. Your Royal Highness, is she the one you have called Lightning? Margaret spoke with a muzzled voice, slowly coming closer to the prince, taking a carefully look at this little girl in his arms. Hearing her question, Roland's heart began to beat faster. Damn, how could I have forgotten about her? He ended up loudly shouting, Sean. The guard immediately walked into the office. Excuse me, Miss Margaret, there is no other way. You will now have to stay here for a while. The prince turned to her while still holding Lightning. She is a merchant from King's City, so bring her to an empty room on the first floor and take good care of her. Without my command, no one is to let her out of the room. As you command. What? No, Your Highness. Please wait. Margaret suddenly realized what was happening. I have no ill towards witches, not to mention that she even is the daughter of Sir Thunder. I would never tell the church about this. It is just a safety measure, Roland interrupted. Later on, I'll come to see you to verify if you're telling the truth. Your Highness, she's woken up, Nightingale said, after opening the door to his office. Roland nodded and followed Nightingale into Lightning's bedroom. There was still steam rising from the bucket beside the big bed, and her drenched clothes hung over the edge of the bucket. The bedside was surrounded by a group of witches, while Wendy was sitting on the bed gently combing the little girl's hair, which until now was still not completely dry. But her previously pale face now had got some of its red color back. Her head laid against two pillows, while her quilt was pulled so high that only everything above her mouth wasn't covered, and her eyes were staring at Roland since the moment he had entered the room. What is the situation? She hadn't received any injury, her coma was caused by exhausting too much of her magic, Nightingale replied. Wendy helped her to clean her body, and when she got into the bed, she didn't wake up for a long time after. Roland went to bed and looked at the girl with a gentle smile. What happened to you, that you would fly back through the torrential rains in so much panic? I found the ruins, Lightning lowly muttered, but the devil was already there. Hearing this, all the expression of the surrounding people immediately changed. Did you enter it? Scroll asked. No, Lightning shook her head and continued to tell the story. The devil stood in the doorway of the basement, and I could hear people crying for help, but I was too scared. I could do nothing besides escape. I didn't even try to save her. Her voice shrunk to a whisper. Am I not qualified to do the work of an explorer? No, you handled it well enough, Roland encouraged her. Good explorers know how to read the situation and do not take unnecessary risks. When you couldn't save her, escaping was definitely the right choice. She had to be a witch, Wendy thought aloud. Nobody else could reach the depths of the concealing forest except for another witch. No, even a witch wouldn't be able to go there. Scroll shook her head in disagreement. That is a ruin from 450 years ago. Without a map, which indicates the direction one has to travel, the task of finding the location of the stone tower in such a vast sea of trees would be extremely difficult, unless... Unless what? Roland asked. Unless someone had already been living there, Scroll said slowly. You mean that they didn't come from the kingdom and found the tower, but instead they are already living there from 450 years ago. One generation after another, living a life in seclusion? Within his heart, the prince had already rejected this speculation. Living for the whole time in the concealing forest shouldn't be possible. Besides a variety of terrible insects and poisonous plants, there was no stable source of food. Only in case you were Bear Grylls, it would be possible to live for such a long term in the forest. Not to mention, in that part of the world, they would have several months of snow every year. Also, with the constant threat of the demonic beasts and devils about, living in the concealing forest was simply suicidal. He once again turned in the Lightning's direction. Were there any signs of smoke in the vicinity of the ruins? No, the little girl shook her head. Maybe there exist more than one map, Soraya offered. Maybe there are other people like us, who are also looking for the whereabouts of the tower. No matter what it is, we cannot help them, Lise concluded in disappointment. Nobody can so quickly reach the stone tower, except for lightning. I'm afraid we still need to know the real situation. Roland touched his chin. In short, we have to find a way to ensure that we can come back safe and sound. For today the teaching will be stopped, we are all in need of a good rest. When the time is right, the riddle will naturally solve itself. Leaving Lightning's bedroom, he turned to Nightingale and said, there is still another problem that we have to solve, next. Just let her take off the god's stone of retaliation. Nightingale laughed, then everything will be made clear to me. Chapter 152 Negotiations, Part 2. At this time the rain outside the window had basically already stopped, the clouds were dispersing, and the sun was already on its way down, tinting the sky red. Roland opened the door to the guest room on the first floor, seeing Margaret walking in circles in front of the fireplace, seeming quite restless. When Sean, who had been standing at the side of the room, saw that the prince had just entered the room, he raised his hand to his chest and bowed. Margaret, who had also seen the prince enter, stopped her walking and stepped in front of him, anxiously asking, Your Highness, how is Lightning? Roland became startled. There were several kinds of outcomes he had imagined, from being calm to angry and possibly acting cold, but he had never expected that her first sentence would be this. She's all right, just a little tired. Is that so? That's good. Margaret looked relieved. You seem to care about her a lot. She looks exactly like her father, especially her narrow eyes and pointed nose. I could immediately see that she was the daughter of Thunder. Then with a sigh, she unbuttoned her neckline, lowered her head, and took off a string of gold ornament hanging around her neck. Only to verify it, previously you said that you have the ability to judge if I am lying. Did you speak about the ability of a witch? If this was what you previous meant and if you wanted to have me prove my sincerity, then could you please let her join in this conversation? I do not like the feeling of being secretly spied on. Set into the gold ornament, connected to the gold chain was a hexahedral light blue piece of jewelry, which had to be a high-quality god's stone of retaliation. Roland had been thinking about what he should say to reduce the other's resentment and doubts, not thinking that it was actually Margaret who took up the initiative to do so. To be honest, he felt some admiration for the seafolk woman. Despite being in such an incredibly unfavorable situation, she was still trying to grasp and hold the leading position in their dialogue. Whether it was her negotiation skills or acting style, everything was consistent with the identity of a successful merchant. He received the offered god's stone of retaliation and put it on a hanger beside the fireplace. Calculating it by the quality of the stone, the estimated suppressive range at which no magic could be used was around 1 meter. Looking at it from Nightingale's eyes, it would look like a black hole around 1 meter big. To avoid the effective range of the god's stone of retaliation, she had to always keep it away from her. Let's go to the reception room, Roland offered. Since the other side showed their sincerity, he shouldn't act so stingy himself. When the two of them entered the reception room, Nightingale had already stepped out from her fog and was sitting on the side on a couch, with her chin placed on both her hands and deliberately showing a bored expression as if she had already been waiting there for a long time. When they had seated themselves, Roland first introduced Nightingale. The name of the woman at my side is Nightingale. She is able to judge the authenticity of your words. Hello, Miss Nightingale, said Margaret, nodding her head, and receiving a greeting in return. You previously said you don't harbor negative feelings for witches, why? Roland immediately started with his first question, which he most wanted to know. As far as I am aware, the fjords also belongs under the influence of the church. But their influence is far weaker than the belief of the three gods. Regarding this, the sea folk and the sand people are quite similar. They both worship the sky, the sea, and the earth. As for me, she paused, I had a very important and good friend. In the middle of a fishing trip with my friend, it happened that we were unexpectedly hit by a storm. Fighting for our lives, our sailboat was unfortunately hit by a wave, breaking it into many pieces. During this disaster, she became a witch, getting the ability to breathe like a fish. She found me when I had already lost consciousness and was floating on the water, so it was she who dragged me to the shore. What happened later? Nightingale's curiosity was piqued. Soon after I had woken up, she left, perhaps bigger than the wish to be with me. She was more eager to be back in the sea, said Margaret regretfully. Since then I have never seen her again. People often say that she would appear during foggy days, raising her body out of the water and guiding the fishing boats with her singing. Guiding them successfully around the rocks. No matter what, my friend could never be evil, nor the devil's minion. Roland nodded. Witches who had awakened to their power were previously only ordinary people, and in cases where the people already knew the witches before their awakening and had deep contact with and understanding of them, their impression would be hard to change only by the unilateral rhetoric of the church. You seem to know a lot about the power of witches. Only with one sentence, you were able to guess that I had more than one witch. Honestly, because of the relationship with my childhood friend and partner, I became interested in witches. I had even thought myself about the possibility to host those strange women. Margaret smiled. Unfortunately, King City is completely differently than Border Town. In the end, I had to give up on that idea because the risk was too big. Seeing that lightning had directly moved into your arms, it seems that she is very close to you, plus she's a witch. So, I thought that you could be the same as me, someone who doesn't hate the witches. As a lord, hiding a few witches shouldn't be a difficult task for you, especially here in the borderland. But you still have to be very careful. If you are found by the church, it would be hard for you to save them. Speaking of it, until now Nightingale still did not find any sign that the other had lied. With this, she had already rejected the possibility of Margaret informing the church. Roland also finally came to a conclusion in his heart, so with a slightly apologetic tone he said, "It seems that I was indeed a bit oversensitive. I hope you don't mind." "No, Your Highness, after all, it was also for Lightning and the safety of the other women." Margaret waved dismissively with her hand. "Au contraire, if you didn't care, then you would truly be an irresponsible person." "Are you familiar with thunder?" Roland asked. "Your love for lightning is much greater than the concern of ordinary people for the heroic children." In the face of such a question, Marjorie hesitated for a moment. Roland had said, if she didn't want to answer a question, she should just act as he had never asked, but she eventually slowly started to speak. "To tell you the truth, later when I left the fishing village, I joined one of the expeditions of Sir Thunder. Together with them I explored the sea for a long time. As a young and new team member, Sir Thunder and his wife took extra care of me. On the day that Lightning was born, I was also there." "She was born on board?" "Yes, during a storm. Outside of the cabin, the thunder rolled and lightning continually lit up the sky. However, shortly after her birth, Sir Thunder's wife died because of a sepsis infection, and I acted as her half-mother. But I couldn't give her any breast milk. I used to chew wheat porridge and mixed it together with fish eggs and flour, slowly feeding it to her." Margaret's voice has become very gentle. Although Sir Thunder was incomparably sad, he still had to command the flotilla. Without him as the backbone, the crew would quickly collapse after only a few months. During that time I just stayed in the cabin, watching over how lightning slowly grew. Until Sir Thunder found the Shadow Islands. After the discovery we returned to the Crescent Moon Bay, and the expedition was over. Not much later I left the fjord and settled down in the kingdom of Grey Castle. So that was what it was, Roland lamented in his heart. No wonder that when she heard the name of Thunder, her reaction would be so strong. As for why Margaret had decided not to continue to follow Thunder on his adventures, he could roughly guess one or two reasons. Even so, it seemed to be the beginning of a love story. It didn't mean that the ending would be one had hoped for. Such a coincidence, to meet again after crossing many rivers and walking along windy mountain roads. Now that they had already such a close relationship, wasn't it possible to get an even bigger discount for buying and selling? He coughed twice. "Ms. Margaret, since we can be counted as acquaintances, about that deal." "Your Highness, that just won't do," Margaret laughed. "A deal is a deal. This is the businessman's eternal principle." Chapter 153 Alchemy, Part 1. Kalsichi walked into the alchemy workshop. Head instructor. When the apprentices saw him enter they immediately bowed. He waved his hand. "You may carry on." The apprentice squatted down again, once again busying themselves with their work. The outermost part of the workshop was the cleaning and sorting room. It was here that all of the gathered materials from all over the kingdom of Greycastle was cleaned, sorted, filtered, and ground down. The design of the cleaning and sorting room was very ingenious. Laid within the stone floor were two rills with water flowing in them which were also parallel to each other. The area in the middle was the path, while the outermost sides of the room were used as cleansing area, and were accessible by wooden bridges. At first glance, the long and narrow washroom was divided by the two streams into 3 sections. The light would fall into the room through windows on both sides, shining on the stone floor and streams, sending strips of lights through the long room. The overlap between light and dark resembled the strip of a snake. Nearly 100 apprentices leaned against the walls, dealing with the materials assigned to them. If the impurities could be easily cleaned and were lighter than the water, it could be directly thrown into the stream. If it was heavier than water, they would be put into a basket, to be brought out of the washing room and then discarded. The effect of cleaning with running water was several times more effective than cleaning in a cask of stagnant water. The apprentice had to study here for 3 to 5 years. Only when their proficiency in the sorting and cleaning of all kinds of materials were good enough and the corresponding knowledge was known by them, did they get the opportunity to be selected as a disciple under an instructor, and in so doing moving on to the next room. Kyle marched through the washing room, stepping into the core area of the alchemy workshop, the refining room. When he opened the door, his line of sight suddenly opened to a wide panorama, 12 giant wooden pillars, all of which came out of the concealing forest and were delivered by ship, propping up this extremely spacious room. Within the surrounding stone walls, there were many windows, and even the roof was included in the construction and had many windows connected to the patio, making the room very bright. In the center of the refining room, there were arranged 6 wide wooden tables. The tables were filled with all kinds of alchemical utensils, round-bottomed flasks, glasses, scales, mortars, furnaces, crucibles. Each instructor was responsible for the management and use of one table, and Kyle, as Redwater City's head instructor, naturally had the longest and widest table to himself, with most of the utensils placed on it. The room was always full of clutter and in disorder, just like the alchemy process in general. Mixing all kinds of raw materials together, then heating, carbonizing, watering or burning them. The results were ever-changing, and simply fascinating. In case you were able to find a clear path to follow within all these changes and disorders, it would become written down, turning it into one of the extremely rare alchemy formulas. As long as you were able to create a unique formula, you could be called an alchemist. So far, Kyle had written down more than a dozen alchemy formulas, and he believed that each of them had been directly sent to him by God and that alchemy could be developing to such a level that it would even be possible to separate the origin, making it possible to transmute everything. "Chavez, how far are you with your snow powder imitation?" he asked. Hearing his name, a 20-year-old young man came over, shaking his head. These wretched alchemists of King City definitely still add other raw materials into it. Until now the powder is too fine that it can't even be extracted and used for anything useful. He was Redwater's alchemy workshop's youngest alchemist, and now he wanted to recreate the alchemy recipe for snow powder, but it seemed to be impossible without a long accumulation of knowledge, many attempts and sometimes a bit of luck. Many people, for their whole lifetime, only managed to become disciplines, even until their death they were unable to get past the last step. Chavez, however, had a remarkable talent for alchemy. 2 years ago, he summarized the recipe of dry distillation of green vitriol to receive an acidic liquid. Winning the recognition of 5 alchemists, owning from now on his own long table. "Do not worry, it will come slowly." Kyle smiled and patted the young man's shoulder, offering him some comfort. After 8 years, as chief instructor, Kyle naturally understood the difficulty of finding the right path through all the disorder and chaos. "However, I ended up making something good yesterday evening. The moment those haughty animals examine it they will lose all their color. Come with me." He went to his desk, to where he had had 2 disciplines deliver a storage box of about half a person's height and made completely out of iron, making it nearly impossible to be stolen nor easy to be destroyed. He pulled out the key and opened the first layer of lattice, Within the middle of the lattice there laid a small piece of transparent crystal. "Did you cut off a piece of a crystal?" Chavez, who stood at the side, took the crystal carefully into his hand to examine it, holding it in front of the window. "No, this is crystal glass." "God, you did it." "Yes," Kyle smiled proudly. "I already can't wait to see their expression when those guys discover that their proudest alchemy discovery had been successfully imitated by me. They will end up showing such a wonderful expression." Chavez, who hadn't been able to suppress his exclamation, had gathered the attention of all the others alchemists. They all put down their work and came over to take a look for themselves. "This is the product you've worked on until late last night? It really is great. It's so beautiful, it looks just like a crystal. Congratulations, this will let the place of our alchemy workshop within the Duke's heart greatly increase." "How did you do it, can you tell me?" Kyle nodded. "We all know that the glass made out of the river sand comes extremely close to it, but in the end when burned, the glass will still contain different colors. This is because the sand still contains some impurities. Now there are two possibilities: first, to think of ways to remove the impurities; second, to try to get sand which is pure from the beginning. We all tried both methods, I also did the same. The success of the alchemical process largely depends on chances and luck. I selected fine white sand from Willow Town and sandstone from the Fallen Dragon Ridge." Everyone around him was quietly listening. No one spoke a word until he had finished his explanation. They even tried to suppress their breath. "So that's how it's done. That was very thoughtful of you." Crystals were very rare and expensive gems, and the colorless and transparent crystal are even rarer. So only the clearest of translucent glass had the right to be known as crystal glass. The haughtiness of the alchemy workshop in the King's City was mostly based on their method for producing crystal glass, always dominating the Redwater City's alchemy workshop. Furthermore, the yearly income of gold royals let the Duke of Redwater City develop a deep feeling of envy. But after today, this situation would soon change. If Chavez could also figure out the composition of snow powder, coupled with the double stone method to create acid, we will be able to completely overthrow the domineering position of King City's alchemy workshop. By then, those who are always used to looking down on other people, I am afraid they will have no choice other than to lower their cookie heads. After picturing this, Kyle Kimmel's mood became even better. As he was preparing himself to screen the raw materials for the second batch of crystal glass, a frantic discipline ran to his side. "Chief Instructor, a messenger from Border Town from the western border want to see you." He brought a letter from Roland Wimbledon with him, the fourth prince. Fourth prince? Kyle began to frown. It seemed that there really was such a person in the royal family. He knew nearly nothing about nobility. In his impression they were all uneducated and ignorant, always fighting for more power and wealth. What is he looking for? I do not know. The messenger said that as soon as you read the letter, you will naturally understand the meaning of His Royal Highness. The chief instructor exposed an extremely impatient look. In all likelihood, the content of the letter will be recruitment offer for only a small sum. If that's the case, I should show him that alchemy isn't a cheap trick. However, since the other person is a prince, I still have to maintain a basic state of etiquette. Take me to see him, so that I can get the letter and send him on his way. Chapter 154 Alchemy, Part 2. When Kyle Sichi returned home, it was already completely dark outside. After dinner with his family, he returned to his study and recorded the recipe for crystal glass together with its required raw materials and his experience of producing it in his own book, The Door to Alchemy. In it, he had recorded his journey from the day he had started as an apprentice to his days as chief instructor. At the same time, he had also included all of the newly discovered alchemic recipes of the Redwater Alchemy Workshop. Kyle believed that with the help of this book, he would earn his place in all kinds of history books. Even thousands of years later, alchemists would still have his name deeply engraved in their minds. Only after the candle was nearly burned out did Kyle finally put down his pen and made himself ready to sleep. Suddenly, he remembered that he still had the letter from the prince, and until now, he hadn't read a word of it. Glancing at the candle, he saw that only a fingernail's worth of candle was left, so he decided to use the last bit of time to read this letter so that he could give a verbal reply to the messenger on the next day. The small remaining bit of candle would only be enough for him to write a few dozens of words, but it would still be enough to read a worthless letter. After opening the envelope, he saw that it contained 3 sheets of paper, of which the first page was the common courtesy and introduction of their titles and their territory. Kyle didn't even bother himself to take a look at it, he directly moved on to the second page. The second page didn't contain the expected recruiting offer or lash out, making Kyle feel a little surprised. Instead, all that was written were 5 strange formulas. After taking a careful look, he noticed that each formula was made up out of 3 compositions. Oh, that's a little mean, he smiled. In the end, regardless of which purpose the prince had, at least he was somewhat tricky in the end. He swept his gaze over the first line. Dry distillation of saltpeter produces nitric acid. Saltpeter, dry distillation, nitric acid, these were all terms used in alchemy. Kyle was totally surprised. Isn't this the double stone acid method? The acidic liquid produced by dry distillation of saltpeter has to be gathered inside a special container. It looks exactly like ordinary water, so it will be hard to recognize. However, it is very corrosive. Not only does it have the ability to burn away skin, but it can even dissolve some metals. This is actually an alchemic formula? Is it possible that Border Town also has an alchemy instructor? He quickly moved his gaze to the next line. If the first sentence was already enough to surprise him, then the second sentence was simply incredible. It consisted of a bunch of inexplicable symbols, standing side by side, forming an equation. Kyle frowned. He had never seen such strange symbols in his whole life. Looking further down, it seemed that the third sentence was the interpretation of the second sentence, including the names and meanings of the symbols. To be honest, he was still unable to understand the symbols even with the explanation. The hard-to-pronounce words were apparently all newly coined words. In order to link the words with the symbols, he had to read them again and again. But even after all this, the sentence meaning was still a much too complex puzzle for him. At this moment, the flame of the candle shook twice and went out. Hell! Kyle cursed loudly within his heart, and without any hesitation he took a new candle from the drawer, and began reading once more. When the second candle had already burned halfway, the chief instructor's hands that were holding the pages were shaking heavily. What seemed to be a letter with nearly nothing on it had taken many times longer than the usual time spent reading a neatly written page. On top of the second page of the letter there were only 5 formulas. Unexpectedly, they were all alchemy formulas. If it was only given like this, then they would still be an outstanding master alchemist, but it was still not an impossible accomplishment to sum up 5 alchemy recipes by oneself. However, these 5 formulas, in addition to the first method for producing acid, were all correlated well with each other. Certain neologisms appeared repeatedly, giving the appearance that it was a maintained cycle. Nitric acid reacts with silver to produce silver nitrate, mixed together with water it becomes nitric oxide. Silver nitrate reacts with iron to form ferrous nitrate and silver. Silver nitrate reacts with copper to form copper nitrate and silver. Copper nitrate reacts with iron to form ferrous nitrate and copper. Previously, Kyle had already put a silver bar into the acidic liquid. It hadn't taken long before the silver was dissolved. Dissolving something or letting it become invisible were the characteristic of acid, it corroded anything. But now, this unknown alchemist had stated that the silver nitrate had been dissolved in the water and on the surface it seemed to have gone away, but in fact, the silver had only morphed into another kind of existence, instead of being annihilated as previously thought. How can this be? No. Kyle shook his head. Apparently, the other side had already guessed my way of thinking, so that meant, these formulas correlating with each other isn't something accidental, he realized. This person wrote these formulas exactly so that I could confirm them, whether it is silver, iron or copper, these are all common minerals. According to the following alchemy recipes, the silver can reappear again, proving that it wasn't annihilated, and still exists within the acid. Seeing these formulas so neatly arranged on the paper again and again, it became increasingly more difficult for him to breathe. If these alchemy formulas could be proven to be true, their years of accumulated experience, the effort that all of his colleagues had put in, and even the writing in his own book, The Door to Alchemy, would be nothing more than a joke. You can go to sleep early on with the child, I have to go to the alchemy workshop again. To the surprise of his wife, he wouldn't attend to her tonight. Instead, Cal put on his coat and left straight into the night. Arriving at the alchemy square, he immediately called for the 3 disciples who were still busy on their duties, telling them that he now had to conduct an alchemy test and they had to light all the torches and candles. The more they lit, the better. His order was quickly executed, and soon after his wide table became illuminated by flames. Afterward, his disciples began to shuffling between the materials room and the refining room, preparing all the test materials for the chief instructor. They had already produced several acid liquids out of dry distilled saltpeter, so he could immediately start verifying the second alchemy recipe. He took some of the acid liquid and poured it into a glass. He then put a silver bar into it. Soon after, the reaction started and the bar gradually corroded, creating many small bubbles. To shorten the anxiety-filled waiting process, he turned his attention to the 3rd page of the letter. But on it were only one short sentence: "This was only a small part of my work. If you want to know more answers, you have to come to Border Town." Damn it. Writing this sentence is equivalent to writing nothing. If I'm able to verify the formulas, I have no other option other than to go and visit this unknown master. Otherwise, there will only be sleepless nights left to me for the rest of my life. After waiting until no more bubbles emerged, he removed the incomplete dissolved silver bar and put a small piece of copper into the cup instead. Immediately an incredible thing started to happen on the surface of the copper. A thin white film began to appear, looking like a beetle's shell. The white layer became larger and larger, slowly covering the whole surface of the copper, while the colorless acid slowly turned blue. It is exactly the same as described in the letter. The white precipitate is silver, and the newly produced copper nitrate and silver nitrate can both easily dissolve in water. Copper nitrate, and then there is silver nitrate, but its solution is blue. Looking into the cup, Calcici saw that it had turned blue, just as stated. Early the next day, when Chavez came to the alchemic workshop, he was greeted by the chief instructor, who looked completely haggard with deep black circles under his eyes, shocking him greatly. "Didn't you get any sleep last night?" Chavez asked, surprised. "Had you worked the night through to create a second batch of crystal glass?" Cal just shook his head and signaled that he should follow him to his table. There he tiredly asked, "You are the disciple of which I'm the proudest, so I would like to ask, what do you think alchemy is?" Just what you have taught me." Looking at the table, Chavez noticed that it was fully loaded with a number of glasses, including a few cups which were filled with solutions of different colors. For example, one of them was sky blue and very eye-catching. Could this be the reason that the chief instructor did not sleep last night? Although Chavez was full of confusion, he still replied honestly, "I think the same. The essence of alchemy is to find the truth of the world in all the disorder and chaos." No, Chavez, I was wrong," Kyle interrupted. "Everyone was wrong. That isn't alchemy." "Was it?" Chavez felt that the other side acted strangely. First, he worked the whole night through in the alchemy workshop, and now he asks such baffling questions. Not able to wait for Chavez's next question, the head instructor began to explain, "Unlike what you, I, and everyone else thought, alchemy is ordered. It can even be said that it is following the principle of 1 + 1 = 2. No matter what you do, material will never increase nor will it disappear." "Will never increase or disappear? What are you talking about? Isn't that what alchemists usually do? To create new things, we just put some commonly seen raw materials and combine them after filtering and separation," Chavez answered in bewilderment. "Yes, I also thought like so. But now after I have read the letter sent by the Lord of Border Town," Cal patted his shoulder, opened his mouth and said some surprising words to Chavez, "I will soon leave this city, and go to Border Town to find some answers. Do you want to come with me?" Chapter 155 Visitor. Roland received the first purchase order for the steam engine, and the transaction's amount was the largest so far. Each naked engine, for the price of 500 gold royals, with the first delivery, planned for in 2 months, followed by an increase of 1 engine per month until it reached a total of 10 engines together. For future technical support, like replacing broken parts or improving equipment, a payment of additional gold royals would then be required. Since the natives had never heard of a free warranty service, it meant more money for Roland. Bhairav was the one who was most excited about the deal. In his view, every increase in the town hall's revenue, no matter whether it was by looting or by trade, was worthy of praise. But there were naturally also some who were against it. For example, Carter, Scroll, and Nightingale expressed all their opinion. They felt that it was still too early for them to sell these powerful machines to outsiders, even more so, considering in hindsight, that Border Town didn't even have enough machines for themselves. Roland didn't explain his reason to them because he didn't look at it only from the view of a lord. No, he also looked at it from the perspective of a way in which he could promote the speed of the Industrial Revolution. It was almost impossible to achieve the task of advancing the process of industrialization alone, even with the knowledge of later generations. After all, the amount Border Town could handle was extremely limited. Even if he produced a lot of industrial products now, there would still be no one there to buy them from him. So, there was only one solution available to him: he must allow more people to join in on the revolution. Only by doing this could new power applications sweep across the kingdom like a wave. What would he get by selling the steam engine? A sufficient amount of money, a huge number of new jobs, as well as a group of skilled workers, with the latter being the most important part. This was also the reason for Roland's low production rate. With Anna's new ability, her former and new production efficiency shouldn't even be mentioned in the same breath. As long as she had enough raw materials, she could now cut out a dozen of steam engines a day. Such products could also easily be sold, but that would only be simply the selling of a machine. But if he wanted to develop the industry, he had to set up a special team responsible for production, assembly, and the maintenance of the steam engine. In Roland's plan, he would build a factory with all the needed tools, such as a boring machine, planing machine, milling machine, and so forth. The complete steam engine production would only be done by the hands of ordinary workers. In the beginning, it should be expected that the factory's efficiency would still be low, and the quality of the first products would also be too horrible to look at, but slowly, everything would surely come onto the right track. In addition, with the experience Anna had gathered by creating them step by step on her own, as long as the workers became familiar with the process, it would be guaranteed that the output would start to increase. The next step would be to use the profits from the sale of machinery to expand the production scale and also to train more workers. While at the same time the already experienced older workers would gain the ability to manufacture products of higher quality, such as steam trains, steam ships, and so forth. For Roland, there was no doubt that this would become a virtuous cycle. Those to whom he had sold the steam engine would also indirectly create benefits for Border Town. For example, if they used them for mining, they could reduce the ore prices. If they used them for shipping, it would also promote trade. When used for spinning and weaving, they could make up for their own deficiency. Roland was already eager to see how the new steam power would spread over the whole nation, and all these machines would come from Border Town. And once he was able to unify the entire kingdom of Grey Castle, he could then save a lot of time and work. He also considered the possibility that buyers could try to imitate the steam engine, but for the new steam engine, he would use new circular cylinder which could only be drilled out by using his boring machine. He had also considered deliberately designed some complex components, which would be hard to reproduce by relying on the current level of technology. Roland didn't believe that they would be able to produce a qualitatively good steam engine, even if they could count on a witch that was able to provide high temperature. After being able to negotiate such a big order, and after finding a way to sell his industrial products, Roland should have felt elated, but he couldn't find any trace of happiness within himself at all. Everything has cleared up itself, so why are you still showing such a bitter face? Nightingale lifted her legs and sat by the side of the table, holding a plate of dried fish. Are you still troubled with the news of the church? When Scroll wasn't around, Nightingale's behavior always became a lot more casual. Sitting on the corner of his desk or laying down on the couch were all her usual places. For other lords, actions such as these would be seen as offensive, but Roland became aware of the fact that he didn't mind it as much as he thought he would, and Nightingale was clearly also aware of it. I always wondered why the church would support Garcia and me for the fight to the throne, but now I think I'm starting to understand it. If my guess is right, I'm afraid that Timothy also got an invitation from the church. Roland knit his brow. In addition to the business deal, Margaret also brought him a lot of new intelligence that she had gathered from the Four Kingdoms. One of the things that Roland was the most surprised about was that the church had attacked and taken over the Kingdom of Endless Winter. If the merchant was right, they would now also be busy preparing the last steps before they launched an attack on the Wolfshark Kingdom. This news had hit Roland like a thunderbolt out of the blue, and ever since then he had turned all of this information in his head over and over, slowly forming a picture filled with bad omens. Why should they support all three of you at the same time with the fight for the throne? It's not called supporting, it's called consuming. Roland shook his head. The church doesn't care if the war spreads throughout the whole country, they'll be happy as long as they see a lot of infighting inside the Kingdom of Grey Castle. As for the possibility that the church's believers might get involved in the war, this didn't actually matter to them. The Kingdom of Grey Castle isn't as weak as the Kingdom of Eternal Winter was. With its vast territory and also a large number of population, if they wanted to take it over by force, they would have lost a lot of their military power. But by helping us to kill each other, they only have to pay a small price to take over the kingdom. It doesn't matter how many believers they would have left, after all, the church wanted to build its own kingdom. Those pills were nothing more than a well-prepared trap. When Wimbledon III issued the order for the Battle of the Throne, it was the same as giving the church the right to dictate the situation. After the Kingdom of Grey Castle, the Wolfshark Kingdom and the Kingdom of Endless Winter have been taken over by them, the Kingdom of Dawn won't be able to stay standing, will be soon to fall. The real purpose of the church is probably the reunification of the Four Kingdoms, taking into account how slow information travels during this era, and the people's indifference to politics. It is quite possible that they will only then be able to see the truth and hear the warnings after it's already too late. This was why he was feeling so anxious. At the moment, there was no basis for them to establish a united front, and hoping that the nobility of the Kingdom of Grey Castle will rush to their rescue if they were to hear his fantastic tale, it was more likely that they would rush to the church and act as their last line of defense. Thus, if Roland wanted to stop them, he had to rely almost entirely on the troops of the Western Territory. But you also have those new weapons, and the army of judges isn't much stronger than ordinary knights. I don't believe that they could win against you. Roland could still clearly remember the time when the church was a horrible monster for Nightingale, a source of endless fear. But that she now had so much confidence in herself, came as a small surprise. He still managed to show her a reassuring smile, but inwardly he could only sigh. It wouldn't be difficult for Anna to make revolvers, but there was still a big difference between producing a prototype and launching a mass production of something. Whether it was the reset of the trigger or the automatically turning of the cylinder, both showed good performance. But as long as he couldn't solve the problem of how to fire the bullets, there wouldn't be any real value in these new weapons. In the absence of mercury, or mercuric nitrate, he will have to use some alternative materials as a primer. Hopefully, the guard I sent to the city of Redwater will bring back good news, Roland thought. Just at this moment, when he had recovered the enthusiasm of the former day, Lightning, who should have been busy carrying out her daily training, came into the office and brought an unexpected message. The flag flowing at the eastern side of Border Town, near the woods, was replaced by a blue flag. According to Roland's secret information system, the blue flag represented that there was a new witch that had entered Border Town. Chapter 156, Putting the picture together. Theo ascended a small hill. From here he could vaguely see the edge of Border Town and also the outline of the Lord's castle. Finally, I'm back, he thought. Previously, in order to reach Silver City he had needed half a month, but the way back they only needed 7 days, the longest time of which was spent on the road between Silver City and Redwater City. Although it seemed that Ashes didn't care for it herself, Theo still chose scarcely used trails to reduce the possibility of being caught by the church. Ashes was the name he had gotten from his witch companion, but even after all this time Theo didn't know if that name was her real one or not. During their travel, she was always dressed in a black robe and a great sword was wrapped in clothes on her back. Her long black hair was tied into a simple tail, dangling down to her waist. Whether it was during the ride or their travel on a boat, she rarely put her focus on Theo. She always walked alone at the front, taking in the surrounding scenery. Probably for her, this trip to border town was just a relaxed and comfortable stroll, sort of like a sightseeing tour. Sometimes Theo would doubt his own judgment. Was she really a soldier? She could easily stumble over the robe she wore. To keep such long hair was equivalent to showing plenty of holes in her defenses. Furthermore, from the beginning of their journey, Ashes never seemed to be afraid of presenting her back to him. The part of her body that he saw from her the most was always her back. He didn't believe that a witch would be able to trust other people so quickly, only letting him guess that she might be confident enough in her own abilities, that even a god's stone of retaliation wouldn't be a threat to her. Theo circled the hillside, soon finding his goal, a flagpole with a red flag hanging on it. He went to the flagpole and dug a bundle out from the mud. Folded within it was a blue flag which was used as a replacement for the red flag. Afterward, he sat down on the ground and clasped his hands. "That's all you have to do?" asked Ashes. At least that was what they had said. Theo wiped away the sweat that had appeared on his forehead. "Go to the foot of the hill on the northeast side of the town. There you have to follow the stone trail until you reach a flagpole. When you arrived at the pole, you only need to replace the flying flag with the blue one buried beside the pole. We will see the flag and soon arrive at your location, so from then on you will only need to wait and we will come." Ashes nodded and then began to look for a relatively clean place to sit. She then reached out her hand in Theo's direction. "Eat." Wait a moment." Theo unlocked his backpack and took a piece of dried meat from inside it. He first tore it in half and threw one piece of it into his own mouth, while throwing the rest of the meat to Ashes. Theo sighed when he saw the witch put the meat into her small mouth and began to chew. Who could have thought that in addition to her great sword, she did not even have one copper royal on her whole body? Even though she was totally penniless, she still dared to swagger so much during their rush back to border town. During the whole way, all the accommodation and meals had been paid for by himself. The rooms in the inns had to be single bedrooms of the finest quality, and when they ate it could only be meat, dry food, and things like portable foods. Furthermore, always had to eat the first half of it by himself before she would eat her part. Probably with the exception of the time she was on the field, she was a very cautious person. However, wouldn't the most prudent approach to safety be to prepare her own food? "You always wanted to know where we are going. It is to the opposite part of the channel." After swallowing the meat, Ashes suddenly said, "I am not sure if you've ever heard the rumors about the fjords, but there are countless islands there. Some of them have a very dangerous environment, so those are always scarcely populated. We are going to settle on one of those islands and build homes on it that only belong to witches." Theo was stunned. No matter how he had tried to inquire from her before, she had always been silent, so why had she suddenly taken the initiative by herself to bring up this matter? "Are you surprised? Are you asking yourself why I didn't bring up this subject before?" Ashes began to explain seriously. "There was the possibility that you were a liar, who would pretend to sleep but at night would instead run to the church. But now the girls should have already reached halfway to their goal. They should already have entered the merchant ferry to the fjord. So even if you tell them now, the church will be unable to stop them. Also, I came here to take the other witches of the Witch Cooperation Association with me, so sooner or later the news will have already reached your ear, thus continuing to hide it has already become meaningless. Even though I've already brought you to border town, you still cannot rule out the possibility that I'm a liar." "Yes, that's true," said Ashes, stressing every word, "but in the end, if we are unable to meet another witch, you will die here, together with everyone else who is trying to harm us witches." "All right," Theo took a deep breath. "Can I ask you some other questions?" Ashes thought for a moment. "Sure, but I can't guarantee that I will answer." "Do you come from the kingdom of Greycastle? I have never seen such eyes as yours before." He decided to start to ask her about her origin first. This shouldn't be any kind of sensitive information and at the same time it should reduce the wariness in her heart. I was born in the kingdom of endless winter, but this has nothing to do with the color of my eyes. The moment I became a witch, my eyes turned into this pair of eyes you see now. Kingdom of endless winter? That's a long way between your kingdom and the kingdom of Grey Castle. There are even 2 other kingdoms between them, so how did you come to Silver City? When I was young I was sold the church, and then, she paused. I've been wandering from the monastery in the old holy city all the way to the kingdom of Grey Castle. Until I meet her, finally ending my wandering life. She? Theo asked curiously. Tilly Wimbledon, Ashes answered, suddenly showing a warm expression on her face. She took me in. The guard's heart beat faster. When he had previously heard her saying the name Tilly, he had never thought that it was any sort of famous person. But now with the Wimbledon family name attached to it, the meaning became entirely different. Tilly Wimbledon was Roland Wimbledon's sister, the 5th princess of the kingdom of Grey Castle. So, when he asked her his next question, his voice quivered. Is she your leader? Leader? Ashes nodded. To me, she is so much more. She is the most important person to me, someone that no one else could ever replace. When the night fell, the 2 lit up a bonfire. Ashes took off her sword, raising it a little bit out of its cover, showing that the edge of the weapon was close to the width of her waist and also that it was covered with many marks of previous clashes. The grayish sword didn't have any edge that was usually seen on a blade, and its weight alone was enough to squash any one person. For most people lifting this sword would already be an impossible task, but in her hands, it seemed to only be as heavy as a light blade. How many blacksmiths had she robbed, in order to get enough material to forge a sword like that? Theo thought, if the prince and his witches delay for much longer, it is entirely possible that I will become the next victim of that sword. I heard that the Lord of Border Town is also a Wimbledon. He decided to find something to talk about. Otherwise, the waiting time seemed to be especially hard for him to bear. Roland Wimbledon, she muttered, I have seen him before. What? Theo opened his mouth. I was sheltered by Tilly and began to work as her guard in the palace. So there naturally was the opportunity to meet several of her brothers and sisters. Ashes seemed to already have a good understanding of the 4th prince, incompetent, arrogant, without any learning or skills. It was hard to believe that he was Tilly's brother. Also, in some areas his courage wasn't so small. To the end of her sentence, her tone had become colder. Theo could not keep himself from shuddering. He had heard a lot of rumors of the prince's previous behavior. For example, he would always brag, was also fond of using cunning plots and things like molesting someone else's maid. Although he had never used violence or threatened the other side, it was still hard to avoid someone in his position. Surely, he wouldn't. At this moment, Ashes suddenly stood up, staring into the direction of the road. Someone has come, and they are more than one. Theo followed her gaze and he could also slowly see the outline of figures gradually appearing from the night's darkness. The one who took the lead was the witch personally responsible for His Royal Highness' security, Nightingale. Chapter 157 Ashes, Part 1. When Ashes saw the people appear, she immediately knew that they were witches. She could feel the magic on their bodies, showing that Theo had not lied. But that wasn't all, she could also roughly determine their strength, especially from the witch leading them. Her magic felt like a sharp knife. Just by focusing on her, she could already feel a faint stabbing pain. My name is Ashes. I'm so glad to meet you, Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. Ashes put her sword aside and approached the 4 witches to embrace one after another. No, she thought, there are 5 of them. Ashes raised her head, looking at the black spot circling above them in the sky. Doesn't she want to come down? She acts as our lookout, the witch in the lead answered laughingly. I am Nightingale. Then she pointed at the other 3 witches, their Scroll, Leaves, and Echo. Then she pointed upwards, and the little girl in the sky is Lightning. When Ashes looked at Scroll, she was startled. The feeling of magic she got from her body was feeble. It seems like her body was constantly hidden behind clouds. Getting such feeling gave her a big surprise. An extraordinary? Hearing her question, Nightingale became curious. Are you able to see the magic? No, not seeing but feeling, Ashes explained, since their body got changed by magic, Extraordinary can detect the form and flow of magic. I think this sister must feel it the same way as I do. Scroll nodded and said with a smile, indeed, it allowed me to find a lot of companions in the vast sea of people. Do you know how rare such extraordinaries are? Nightingale said. Hearing that the other's concern was about the frequency of extraordinaries, rather than what are extraordinaries. Ashes thought to herself, how could it be that the Witch Cooperation Association had already heard about an extraordinary? This term is strictly banned by the Church. After all, their abilities are directly affecting their own body and with this aren't suppressed by the God Stone of Retaliation. Any person who got into contact with an extraordinary was the #1 enemy for the Church. There will be one extraordinary witch for every 1,000 other witches. Ashes was still thinking about the previous issue, but her face was still unreadable like always. So far, with the addition of Scroll, I have seen only 3 people. After pausing for a moment, Ashes asked, by the way, I remember that the name of the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association was Kara. How is she? She is dead. Nightingale shook her head, she died during the search for the Holy Mountain. That's a real pity. Ashes expressed her condolences in a small voice, but what she really was concerned about at the moment was that the other side hadn't shown much sadness when Nightingale had answered her question. Who is your new leader right now? Let us go back to town first. Nightingale just smiled, you will see him soon. They walked into the town like any ordinary civilian, giving Ashes the feeling that there was something wrong. How could it be that the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association are able to just walk along the streets while holding torches? And what was even more unexpected was that the town wasn't dead after nightfall. Behind the paper windows of many residences, she could see the outline of weak fires, like candles burning. Listening carefully, she could even hear many children reading aloud. Candles, although this kind of item can't be called expensive, shouldn't be easily affordable with civilians' limited savings. They wouldn't be able to buy many of them, so they couldn't easily be used. Seeing that the town actually had this many residents lighting up candles at night was such an incredible scene to look at. Also, judging by the constant word-for-word reading, are they all trying to teach their children how to read? However, since the others didn't mention this strange behavior with a single word, Ashes was too lazy to ask herself. Anyway, here isn't the place where we will live in the future. The only thing I have to do is to take you away from here as soon as possible. After many turns along the way, the group was getting closer to the castle area, allowing Ashes to see the walls and the patrolling guards even in the dark night. Where are we going? She couldn't stop herself from asking. But to her shock the answer she got from Nightingale was, to Border Town's castle, it is right in front of us. Wait, she slowed down. That is the place where the Lord lives. Well, it is also the home of us witches. Were you able to reach an agreement with the Lord? Ashes frowned. Even if the local forces were vigorous and coordinated, it was still difficult to face the Church with their God Stone of Retaliation. So, the only possibility for cooperation between a local lord and the witches was when the witches had their own way out, assuring them that they would survive. Unfortunately, when having to deal with such a vulnerable group of witches, most lords were reluctant to sit down and talk fairly about the conditions of the contract. It was more often that they endlessly squeezed them dry and demanded more, so the road to reaching an agreement with local lords was usually blocked. I suppose you could call it that, Nightingale said in a voice without any trace of depression. Rather, it was full of warmth. Every one of us has signed a contract with His Royal Highness. Ashes wasn't able to feel happiness for them. Those contracts written with paper and pen were not binding at all. As soon as the Lord became tired of paying them or wanted to terminate their relationship of equality, he only had to knead the contract into a ball and throw it into the fireplace. There would be no one who would fight for the injustice the witches would have to face. Their status was like a small boat alone in a storm, always afraid of getting overturned. Fortunately, now I'm here, she thought. With me, they can leave from here and go to the other side of the sea. There, us witches have built our own homes and live far away from the Church and any other secular threats. Sure enough, when they stepped through the castle's gates, the guards just nodded and said hello when they saw the appearance of the witches. Compared to the king's palace, the lord's castle in border town was undoubtedly much smaller and darker. There were so few solitary torches burning on the walls of the corridor that their swaying lights weren't able to cover the entire stone floor. Walking along the dark corridors, Ashes got a depressing feeling. However, this feeling only lasted until they reached the entrance to the living room. There, the room was suddenly brightly lit up by fires. Entering the hall, Ashes could see some more witches. It seemed they had all been waiting for her, and the moment she stepped into the room they began to applaud and welcome her. Nightingale, who wanted to give a brief introduction, took 2 steps forward, but suddenly one of the witches who had previously waited in the room rushed over. "Wendy," somebody cried. Everything that happened was registered by Ashes, but she still decided not to take any countermeasures. After all, she only had the feeling of joy and surprise from the approaching witch. There was no trace of hostility at all. So after a few seconds, she was embraced by a warm body. "You survived," said an unknown voice, excitedly. "Thank you for saving me." Ashes became confused. "You are?" "My name is Wendy," the voice said, releasing her hands. She took a deep look into Ash's eyes. "The little girl in the choir, do you remember me?" On the second floor in one of the bedrooms, only 2 people were left, Ashes and Wendy. Ashes had never expected to meet a partner from the monastery here. So, calling her partner was a very far stretch. With the exception of that night, Ashes had never had any interaction with Wendy. In fact, she hadn't even paid any attention to the other girls enclosed with her in that underground room. She had not even realized that there were others who had to go through the same horrible acts of people forcing themselves on them. Even more, she had never thought that one of them would also become a witch. "I was able to flee from the monastery and settle down in the Seawind region," Wendy began to talk. After a long time of silence she continued, "Then someday I got the news that the monastery was set on fire later that day, and that all the children were missing." "Did you do that?" "The fire?" Ashes shook her head. "It was the church's doing. They did it to cover up the whole scandal. I killed some of the managers and the army of judges who tried to stop me until members of the church's God Punishment Army arrived. That scar over my eye was left by one of them. If I hadn't chosen to escape by myself and had instead waited until the follow-up, if I had to face more members of the God's Punishment Army, I am afraid I would have died that day." Chapter 158 Ashes, Part 2. "They are the most excellent warriors of the church and are used as the top secret weapon against us witches," Ashes explained. "They have the same amount of strength as I, and neither are they any slower than I am. Also," she hesitated, "it seems they don't have their own conscience. When I was fighting against them, I was able to cut off the right hand of one of the soldiers from the God's Punishment Army. But he didn't hesitate for even 1 second to use his left hand to slash at my eye. Even when I turned and fled, his movements weren't affected in any way by the wound I'd given him. This doesn't have anything to do with having a strong fighting will. Even if they were able to keep fighting after losing one arm, they would still be affected in the end. For example, something like losing their balance. It is simply impossible to adapt to that in such a short period of time." "I've only heard of the church's army of judges," Wendy whispered. "Since they have such powerful warriors, why did they never appear during the previous fights against witches?" "That, I do not know," Ashes slowly revealed. "Even I only heard the name God's Punishment's Army after I later returned to the old holy city and inquired about it from some of the city's inhabitants." You went back?" Wendy asked, surprised. "Ah, how could I let those dregs off so easily?" She stood up and went to the window. "Later on I attacked several small churches and camps of the army of judges. During one of the raids I caught one of their presiding judges. Previously I had actually thought that they weren't afraid of death. But having to face torture and death, his performance wasn't much better than that of any ordinary person. He soon showed a look of fear and began to plead with me for mercy. It was from his mouth that I heard the name of the God's Punishment Army for the first time. Before their ceremony they were all members of the army of judges. Only the best of the warriors will get this honor, and their acceptance must be voluntary. It seems there is a strong relationship between the success rate and their willingness. The big difference between the soldiers of the God's punishment army and us are that they do not get their power naturally or because of their natural talents. No, instead they become transformed artificially. Hearing this news, Wendy was quite shocked. She became utterly speechless. I suppose the reason why they cannot openly use them during wars, like they do with the army of judges, is perhaps because of the side effects of their transformation. When they lose their self, then there is no difference between them and the monsters. Ashes sighed. During the time I was carrying out my revenge, I would often hide myself within a deep well or sewers during the day, only coming out in the evening to start my attack against the believers. But when the church began a complete city-wide search, I decided that I had to flee from the old holy city. On the day of my retreat, the blood on me was tightly sticking to my clothes and my skin, giving me a very grim appearance. Probably, looking at me out of the eyes of an outsider, I wouldn't have looked any differently than a mindless beast. She only stopped her speech when she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder. Now, that time doesn't matter any longer. Here you can live the good life of an ordinary person. Under the prince, the life of me and my sisters has become very good. After gaining the experience of fighting together during the months of demons and later, after repelling the Longsong stronghold's attack, the largest part of the townspeople have already accepted the existence of us witches. This town has turned out to be the holy mountain we have always been searching for. Ashes leaned against the window and took a deep look at the woman in front of her. She couldn't detect any sign of the thin women with dull eyes that she remembered from her life in the monastery. Looking at Wendy, it was quite hard for her to imagine that she had ever looked like she did during her childhood. Both in body and appearance, when they were compared with the child of that time, it was completely different. Moreover, the gentle and natural tone of her voice made others feel a peaceful serenity. However, there were still some words which had to be said. I won't be staying here, nor was that the reason that I've come to Border Town. She paused. I came to this town, to take all of you with me away from here, taking you to a place which is really safe, unlike Border Town, which isn't such a place. You do not want to stay here. Wendy froze for a moment. Why? As long as we live on this continent, we will always be threatened by the church. Because of this, Tilly had gathered the majority of the witches living in the kingdom of Grey Castle and has taken them with her to the fjords. That is where she intends to build her own country. Doesn't the fjord also have churches? Because of the special topography of the archipelago and its separation into many islands, their influence can only be maintained on some of the bigger islands, and also, Ashes twisted her mouth, there aren't any soldiers of the God's punishment army on these islands either. And if they found themselves there, they would soon have to face the wrath of the witches. Going from one island to another, the church's forces would be uprooted, just like when they had hunted us witches. You and your sisters must also leave, Wendy, she continued to try persuading her. It was a mistake to spread those rumors. You should get rid of them as soon as possible. When I could hear them, the church definitely has also heard of them, and they will never allow the witches to organize themselves. I don't think that it will be long before the church's army of judges destroys the kingdom of Grey Castle. When you have to face the God's punishment army, do you really believe that the fourth prince will protect you? No secular lord will ever be willing to spend his own life to save a witches. Right at this moment, he may still be good to you, but in times of distress, he won't hesitate for even a second before abandoning you. After Ash's speech, Wendy kept silent for a long time, before opening her mouth and declaring, I do not know what the thoughts of my other sisters are, but I won't leave Border Town. At the moment, you're standing at the edge of an overhanging cliff, Ashes frowned, and with every day you wait it will become even more dangerous. If you want to avoid the impending danger, leaving the town, leaving His Highness, what difference would there be between your approach and when he would leave us? I do not want to be such a person, and, she took a deep breath, furthermore, in the case that His Highness ever had to face against the pressure of the church, I do not believe that he would ever act as you predicted. Nightingale has already asked him the same question, and His Highness has then answered, I will make this town a place where every witch can live a life of an ordinary person, even if I have to become the enemy of the church. Ashes was unable to respond, she didn't know what to say, she had already heard too many promises such as this, And even if the other party really was willing to protect the witches, in the end, what would that even change? In the face of such an overwhelming power, it would only end up increasing the number of sacrifices. Until now she still had to grasp the situation regarding the Witch Cooperation Association, more accurately the death of the snake witch Kara. It seemed that the surviving members of her former group have all been fully integrated into Border Town by the Lord. Spreading the news of a safe haven up to Silver City wasn't done by one of the surviving witches, but rather by one of the Lord's own guards. Although she did not know what cunning plans he had, and how he had managed to make the witches trust him, but under the threat of her greatsword, his carefully constructed camouflage would all soon fall apart, most likely. "I want to talk to your lord, Roland Wimbledon," Ashes finally said. Her appointment to see the prince was scheduled for the next morning. By that time, Ashes was brought into the office by Nightingale, now having to face this disgusting man once again. Although she didn't want to admit it, it was clearly visible to her that Tilly and the prince both shared the same blood. They both had the same long gray hair with a simple beam in the back of their head that during the sunlight of dawn would have a small touch of silver to it. The symbol of the royal family of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. His forehead and nose were also somewhat similar to Tilly's, and the more similarities Ashes found, the more she disliked him. Comparing his previous appearance at the courts with the normal appearance he showed now, she had to say that his dress today was unusually clean. Furthermore, in addition to well-fitting clothes, she could detect almost no signs of wealth, such as jewelry, earrings, necklaces, rings, and bracelets. Even though he was just simply sitting on his chair, Ashes still had the feeling that he was looking down on her. The aura of a leader. She couldn't stop this thought from appearing. Well, if only taking his outwards appearance into consideration, he really seems to have taken a step in the right direction, Ashes thought coldly in her heart. But it won't be much longer that you will be able to maintain such a posture. "Welcome, I heard your name is Ashes?" The other side took the initiative to start the conversation. "You are a messenger sent by my sister, aren't you?" "It was my own decision to come to Border Town." "But you can still be called her messenger, right?" Ashes frowned. Why was he so emphasizing on her role as a messenger? She did not want to be entangled in such insignificant banter. "I could." "Well, Ashbringer," he said, revealing an unrecognizable smile, "I hear you want to take my witches away?" TN, anyone here who detects the pun at the end of the chapter? Chapter 159, The Most Powerful Persuasion. Before Roland had agreed to the meeting, he had already heard every part of the talk between Wendy and Ashes. He didn't expect that the long-lost Tilly Wimbledon would suddenly become the leader of another witch organization. Not only that, but she had set all of this up right in front of all of them. No, she had even gathered most of the witches in the whole kingdom. What was even more intolerable was that she was now actually wanted to put her claws into his own territory. According to the information gathered by Nightingale, the witch in front of him was an extraordinary, and her ability most likely belonged to the combat type. Any witch who belonged to the kind of extraordinary had to be treated with the utmost care. So, when Roland was meeting with Ashes in his office, not only was Nightingale hiding in her fog, no, even Anna was standing by his side. She had placed several tiny black fires around his desk, all of which were completely invisible to the naked eye, cutting off the area between the two side walls. As long as Ashes dared to rush towards him, she would definitely end up cutting herself into many thin pieces. Even so, Ashes was an extraordinary witch. She still wasn't wearing the god stone of retaliation, but once she put on one of those stones, she would then turn into an unrestricted destructive power. Fortunately, the god stone of retaliation was hated by the majority of witches, and she was most probably also taking this aspect into account. So Ashes didn't carry such a stone when she was trying to win over the witches in Border Town. "Your witches? Don't be so arrogant, they are all living people, they aren't your personal belongings," Ashes declared coldly. Roland got shocked by her unexpected words. This was the first time that he had to feel the feeling of defeat during a battle of words. He had already become used to calling them my people, my subjects, and the like, but now he had unexpectedly faced democratic criticism, letting him feel extremely embarrassed. Although his words were in accordance with the usual practice of this era, the people or items in the Lord's territory, after all, belonged to the Lord, so calling them his wouldn't bring any problems. But if he was to now stress this point in front of Nightingale and Anna, it would only show that his EQ was low, and he'd just be jumping into an already prepared pit. So, he coughed twice, and tried to get the flow of the conversation into a positive direction for himself. I never thought of them like that, they only stay in the town because they want it. But I have to point out that I myself believe that this place is still the best place for them to live on freely. As for living in the fjords as you have offered, not to mention that the trip itself would already be very dangerous, crossing over the whole kingdom, no, the fjord's climate is also unpredictable, always having to fear tsunamis or perennial storms. That is simply not a suitable place for people to live in. But there at least, the power of the church would be at a minimal. Furthermore, the witches can rely on their powers to transform their homes, making them safe against any natural disasters. But there is no way in which you could shield them against the strength of the God's stone of retaliation, not to mention the God's punishment army. Ashes mercilessly countered, "Do you know how foolish it was for you to do what you have done? Spreading the news of your witches will only lead to a visit from the church. With respect, you have no way to win against the God's punishment army. Now, the right choice for you would be to let your witches leave your territory so that you can all avoid the tragedy that your actions is leading you towards." Roland had already heard her telling Wendy about the God's punishment army, so he knew that using force to persuade her would be many times more effective than him using words. Of course, he could also simply ignore Ashes, but in that way, he would already be giving up the fight for the witches that are under Tilly Wimbledon's influence. So, despite only having just a small hope of achieving his goal, he still wanted to give it a shot. "Are you able to fight against several soldiers of the God's punishment army at the same time?" Roland asked. Ash's facial complexion became clearly puzzled, but in the end, she still stretched out 3 fingers. "3 soldiers, I'm able to defeat." "Then let's have a fight," Roland said, sitting straight and becoming seriously. "Let the test tell you if I'm able to win against the God's punishment army or not." "What do you mean?" Ashes became stunned for a moment, her cold face finally showed a different expression than her usually cold face. "A fair test, a fight one-on-one," Roland said, stressing word for word, "if I'm able to beat you, you have to accept that I have the ability to resist the church." "You and I? Or do you want one of your witches to take your place?" "Of course it won't be me, but it won't be a witch either. The soldiers of the God's punishment army will all be wearing a God's stone of retaliation." Roland smiled. "Your opponent will be an ordinary knight." Although he regretted it a bit that he would not personally be taking part in it, the other side was a witch with a military strength completely off the charts. From the description he had heard from Wendy, she alone was powerful enough to make her way through a whole monastery, and in the end, was even able to escape from the pursuit of the God's punishment army. Even fighting empty-handed or with only a wooden sword, she would still be extraordinarily lethal. The actual effectiveness of a revolver was still unknown. And for the sake of safety, he had decided to give this great task to Carter. If he had been able to lay his hands on an AK-47, then Roland would have tried to take her on by himself. Ordinary knight, Ash's face once more turned back to her original expression of indifference. "If I win, you will let the witches follow me?" "Of course not, after all, you cannot offer the same." "In the case I would win, you surely wouldn't go back to Tilly and bring all of her witches to Border Town, right? In that case, what would be the significance of your suggested duel?" "I already said it previously, it's not a duel, it's a test," Roland corrected her. "The significance lies in the fact that you will know that in the face of the church's power I'm not without any possibilities to resist. Furthermore, when you later go back to the fjords you will remember that outside of the fjords, there is also the Western Territories, and more precisely Border Town, that can provide a place for witches to live. Of course, if you win, it could be that Wendy will start to persuade the others, which would be many times more efficient than you doing it by yourself." "I will never lose," Ashes declared. "Now call your knight." "Not now," Roland waved his hand, "we will hold the test in a week. I have to make the necessary preparations first. Until then you can freely live in the castle." experiencing with the other witches how it feels to live in border town. And as a witch with a feeling for the town life, perhaps you will even change your opinion without us having to have a fight. Ashes looked at the prince coldly for a long time, but then she finally nodded. You are right, maybe I won't have to wait for 7 days, they will change their view even earlier, freely leaving border town together with me. Roland just shrugged his shoulders in answer. When the other was already at the door, he suddenly called to her once more, hold on. Can it be that I already have seen you from somewhere? Although he was certain that he had never seen her face before, her stature as he looked at her from behind, he got a strange feeling of familiarity. Roland could also slightly recall something, a sense of familiarity that seemed to be coming from the time he had been living in the king's palace. Didn't your guard already tell you? Ashes didn't even look back at him. If it were not for Tilly who stopped me at that time, I'm afraid you'd now only have one hand left. The moment the door was closed, Nightingale appeared in front of him, and asked with a frosty voice, You touched her ass? What? Roland became startled. I can't remember to have ever seen such a person in the palace, and what do you mean with touched? Nightingale showed a dissatisfied look. There was naturally to hell with it, although I really have touched the maid's ass. If I answer this question I'm afraid I would be showing some flaws. Furthermore, what is wrong with feeling something up with your hands? After all, I also don't care about your peeping habits. Kiki, Anna interrupted their conversation. Are you sure that Carter will be able to beat her? If he fails, it may affect the others' witches' confidence in you. Fortunately, it seemed that Anna was still calm. Roland discovered in relief, even though an enhanced witch is not affected by the god's stone of retaliation, she still has to fight with their own body. Comparing this with the quick fire of hot weapons, the limitations of the body will always be too big in comparison. I think the odds that we win is at least around 70%. But for that I will have to finish the development of the ammunition by next week, Roland thought. Chapter 160 Confrontation. Roland had already corrected designs for the revolver's bullet a long time ago. After all, circular lead bullets and loose gunpowder were an arrangement that was simply too archaic. Taking Anna's processing capacity into account, it should be feasible for her to directly manufacture the shell for the ammunition. The problem was that there didn't exist a reliable primer, which could light the cartridge of the bullet that was filled with black powder. The outer shell of the ammunition was generally made out of mercury fulminate, which was very sensitive to impacts. When the firing pin was pulled and it hit the base of the bullet, the mercury fulminate would ignite, which would ignite the black powder, ejecting the bullet from the chamber. It was such a pity that even after breaking his head over it, he still couldn't recall the necessary raw materials he needed for the mercury fulminate. From a literal point of view, he would definitely need nitric acid and mercury. However, if he looked at the result of the chemical equation he had written down, it became apparent that these two substances would only produce nitric acid together. In addition, knowing the raw materials wasn't equally to having a smooth production of usable products. Roland would still have to discover the right concentration and temperature for the reactive process, and whether he still needed to add another catalyst or not add one, was also a crucial point he had to figure out before finishing the product. Moreover, because of the sensitive properties of mercury, manufacturing it was considered a very dangerous process, and if it exploded one could easily lose some fingers, so Roland was afraid of trying it out personally. So, Roland had to settle for the second best option, using a metal ammunition case but keeping the old flintlock ignition, which would require that the spark could enter the interior of the ammunition case to ignite the gunpowder. Therefore, he had to leave a hole at the bottom of the ammunition case, but he still had to find a method which would prevent leakage of black powder. Obviously, these 2 points were contradictory to each other. The greater the opening, the faster the leakage of gunpowder. Yet if the opening is too small, it would become too difficult for the spark to ignite the gunpowder. He needed something that would allow the spark to ignite the powder, while at the same time blocking the hole, to prevent the leakage of gunpowder. Roland's first thought was coloxylin, which was also known as nitrocellulose. It was also one of the few chemicals which he still remembered and could also be used for weapons because it had such a simple production method. The cotton had just to be soaked in 2 strong kinds of acids. The two acids it used were the commonly available sulfuric acid and nitric acid, and there would be no danger involved in producing them. Even though he still had wanted to wait for the hopefully soon arriving alchemist, but now, where he had the deadline of 7 days, he decided to roll up his sleeves and get to work. Taking the quill, Roland began to write down the idea he had already in his head for a long time. The first ingredient he needed was cotton, and the best cotton yarn were the ones which weren't weaved or dyed, and it was exactly this kind that he had brought back with him from his visit to the Duke's castle, and was now also piling up within his castle's warehouses. Cotton yarn needed to be skimmed. Otherwise the grease attached to its surface would prevent the nitrification. He was already familiar with the stuff required for removing the oil. It was sodium hydroxide, which was also commonly known as caustic soda. At the same time, it was also one of the raw materials needed for making soap. For producing soap, one had to add fat to caustic soda, and then stir it until it became solid. Afterward it could be used as washing soap. But Roland has been too busy developing the industrial and agricultural technology and with defending Border Town against foreign enemies, that he hadn't found any time to invent any such commodities. As for how he was meant to produce caustic soda, the simplest method would probably be the electrolysis of salt water. So the prince discovered that in order to create the new types of bullets, he first had to develop a DC generator. Asterisk. Ashes was walking along the Shurshui River, feeling somewhat depressed. Since the other witches knew that she had come to Border Town to bring the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association away, their attitude towards her had cooled down a lot, and there was no longer any signs left of the warm welcome she had received last night. Moreover, she had also noted that most of the witches were practicing their ability in the castle backyard, which showed that Roland had also found a way to avoid the suffering from the demonic bite. Originally Ashes had wanted to use this vital piece of intelligence to show her goodwill to the other witches, but her plan was unexpectedly shattered right from the beginning. So in addition to telling them the disadvantages and advantages of leaving Border Town, she had nearly nothing else left for persuading them to move. What surprised Ashes the most was, even though Roland Wimbledon's appearance had changed very little since the time she last saw him, every gesture from him now contained an indescribable temperament, completely out of tune with the image he previously held of being a dandy. How could this be? He had previously definitely belonged to the incompetent class. During business appointments he would always think first about finding a way to escape, never standing up for others, and even if the problem was clearly caused by him, he was also too afraid to take on any responsibility. That time when he had thought about harassing her, she only needed to throw him a hateful look, to make him fall to the ground in panic. But she had later heard from Tilly, that he had claimed that he had fallen by accidentally, and that the fifth princess was at fault for it. After all, why would she even find such an ugly woman as a guard? From that time on, Ash's view of the fourth prince had fallen to the lowest possibility ranking. Previously she had believed that such a type of person would be easy for her to handle, but during today's negotiation she had failed utterly to gain the upper hand. Especially when the other side suggested a one-on-one competition, she had discovered that her threat of using military force didn't work any longer, since the other side hadn't thought about escaping. Instead, it might even have had the complete opposite effect. If she had threatened him at that time personally, in addition to reducing the witch's positive impression of her, it would not have had any other results. Ashes sighed. If she just could be as smart as Tilly, every problem that appeared before her could have been all smoothly solved. The moment she encountered a situation such as this, she would surely have been able to come up with a solution to this, right? If she hadn't wanted to help Tilly as much as possible, Ashes really would have taken the next ship heading to Silver City and also leave the kingdom of Grey Castle as soon as possible. Unconsciously, she had already left the area of the town. She was no longer be able to see those green wheat fields on the other side of the river, but instead she was looking at the unclaimed woodland. When Ashes was already ready to turn back, she suddenly felt the fluctuation of magic behind her. Subconsciously turning her head, she could barely see a knife heading towards her cheek, taking advantage of her horizontal movement. The magic fluctuation had transformed into a surging billow, and Ashes suddenly felt a piercing pain coming from her cheek, The other person's systematic and logical moves were clearly nothing like one would expect to come from an ordinary person. Ashes no longer hesitated, completely dumping her passive attitude, to concentrate on avoiding the dagger coming to her from the front. She put all her strength on one foot and catapulted out of the way. However, the other side just disappeared into thin air, and within a blink of an eye, she had already appeared behind herself, leaving Ashes totally unable to follow her opponent's movement. She drew her sword and rotated in a circle, turning so fast that she created a dull whistling sound with the sword, causing a large amount of dust to raise up from the ground. This attack from her had no dead areas and was able to scoop up any kind of threat, but in front of this unknown enemy she was facing, even this tricky attack of hers ended in a complete failure. When her sword swept through the attacker's previous position, there was nothing to be touched. That's bad, she thought to herself, straining all of the muscle in her body, ready to react to the next round of attacks from the other side, but the shadow just disappeared from in front of her. The dust settled down slowly, while the person again appeared near Ashes, playing with the dagger she was holding in her hand. It was Nightingale. Should I see this as a warning? Ashes frowned. Of course not, Nightingale said, putting her dagger back to her waist. I just wanted to see the strength of an extraordinary. Are you sure? It was more like. Do you think I would force you into leaving Border Town quickly, or otherwise I would not stay polite with you? Nightingale interrupted her. If that was the case, what would be the difference between Kara and me? Kara? Why would she mention the former leader of the Witch Cooperation Association? Ashes asked herself in confusion. You can rest assured that I won't hinder you from approaching any of my sisters, and if someone is willing to leave with you, I don't think His Royal Highness will stop you. I certainly would not. Nightingale paused, but if you threaten to hurt His Highness, I guarantee you that next time I won't just be stabbing at your side anymore. Here she grinned and then disappeared into thin air. Enjoy your time in Border Town. Sure enough, you still warned me off. Ashes shook her head,